Direct from CBS News election headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening from our CBS News election headquarters in New York, from which we are originating this CBS News evening news program. Across this nation of ours, it appears that the populace has gone to the polls in record numbers. Perhaps more than 71 million of us have trooped to our polling places today and cast our ballots for the presidency of the United States, many states for senators, in all states for congressmen, in many other states for governors, and many propositions on the ballot as well. And now, with the polls still open throughout most of the United States, through our CBS IBM vote profile analysis, we are able to say that Lyndon Johnson is the probable winner in Kentucky, the first state to be recorded on our board for Lyndon Johnson tonight. 450,000 votes to 261,000 for Goldwater, with 62% of the vote tabulated in Kentucky. But according to our vote profile analysis, our system of selected precincts by which we can determine how the entire state is going, we can give the 9 electoral votes probably to Lyndon Johnson with a probable 61% of the vote. I'll be back with more details of the vote in a moment after this message. Now 2% of the vote has been counted, the popular vote in the nation, and Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey have 576,380 votes to Senator Barry Goldwater and Congressman William Miller's 393,771. That's 69% of that 2% of the national popular vote counted, and for Johnson, 31% of it counted and for Goldwater. And we, with our VPA IBM analysis, have given the state of Kentucky probably to Lyndon Johnson. That is 9 probable electoral votes for Johnson recorded on our board so far. Results up to this minute, those are, and the beginning of what should be a very long and an interesting evening here. It hardly seems right that anything as important as a presidential election should be as much fun as I think we're going to have tonight. If you are to enjoy this evening fully with us, regardless of what party you're for, you ought to understand how we're playing the game here. Here with me in our CBS election studio are Harry Reasoner and Roger Mudd to report on the presidential race, Bob Trout to cover the contest for those seats in the House of Representatives and the Senate, Mike Wallace going to be reporting the election of the 25 governors who are up this year, Eric Sevareid reporting and observing whatever comes to Mr. Severide's mind tonight. Tonight we will be giving you 2 sets of figures. Keep this in mind, please. The first figures that you'll see on our board is the actual collected vote, the so-called popular vote, although presumably, whatever it is, it won't be popular with everyone. And this year, the 3 broadcast networks have joined forces with the Associated Press and the United Press International to form a network election service. We call it NES. Well, this service provides us with 145,000 reporters in the nation's 180,000 voting precincts. This tabulated vote is often deceptive at an early hour, though, and that's what must be remembered. If the first votes reported, for instance, come from a Republican area, well, then the Republican might jump into an early lead. Later, as the Democratic precincts report, well, that lead, of course, could easily shift to the Democratic side. Incidentally, we just had a CBS News IBM vote profile analysis call that indicates Lyndon Johnson is the winner in Kentucky. We're moving him out of the probable column into the win column in Kentucky. Our current VPA estimate will give him about 61% of the vote in Kentucky. Well, now, continuing with what I was telling you about the popular vote, those votes come in from areas, not individuals, of course, and early returns may not be totally representative. So the second set of figures is designed to give you a more accurate early picture of what's happening, and you will see that only here on CBS. We think VPA, the figures I've just been giving you, vote profile analysis, is the best system ever devised for estimating early in the evening probable winners and losers. Our 1,900 VPA reporters across the country call us directly from a carefully selected number of precincts representing every major voting group in each state, but a small number of precincts. Those returns are put into IBM's 7010 computer here in the studio. The returns are mixed with a library of stored information. The IBM 7010 does the complex arithmetic which provides the information, which enables CPS to make highly accurate advance estimates of what the eventual totals will be. And our VPA profile analysis now shows that Johnson is the probable winner in Indiana. That's a state that Senator Barry Goldwater had counted on winning. It is in his list of states he must win to win, but VPA says now that Johnson is the probable winner in that Republican state, normally Republican state of Indiana, with a possible percentage of 54 to 46 for Johnson. Now, in another area here, besides that IBM 1040, we're working with a second battery of computers, the IBM System 360s. System 360 is keeping track, 360 that is, of which precincts have reported and how. The figures come from the IBM machine. The mistakes, and we hope there won't be any, come from us, of course. It's a very highly complicated and a very big and complicated problem for us here, but we're going to solve it for you. We're going to be reporting the popular vote and the VPA analysis vote, two separate things. VPA analysis we expect to be much faster in being able to tell us who has won in which states. Let's get more details on these now from our presidential desk, Roger Mudd and Harry Reisner. Gentlemen.
Walter, you announced the voter profile analysis win by President Johnson in Kentucky, and apparently this 9 electoral vote victory that he fashioned there in Kentucky was from the fact that he ran 11 points ahead of John Kennedy in every area of Kentucky. The most significant of the showings that the president made tonight in Kentucky is the strength he demonstrated in the small towns and in the farms, where he is registering his sharpest increase over John Kennedy of 4 years ago. In the city of Louisville, always a key to carrying Kentucky, which Richard Nixon won 4 years ago, Lyndon Johnson tonight pulled in a 3-2 edge, and the city of Lexington, Kentucky, normally Republican, went for Lyndon Johnson today by a margin of about 8,000 votes. There is no sign of a white backlash in Kentucky up in the northeast section around Covington, and the suburbs are being closely carried tonight by President Johnson. Republican defections to Lyndon Johnson running up to 25%. In Tennessee, the popular vote in Tennessee shows Lyndon Johnson with a small lead of about 1,000 votes, with only 12% of the popular vote counted in Tennessee. So just on the basis of Kentucky as a key to the upper South and Tennessee, Lyndon Johnson tonight is off to a good start. Harry?
Roger, we've got a very interesting result in Indiana, too, where President Johnson is listed as the probable winner. Although with the tabulated vote so far, Senator Goldwater is leading 46,000 to 29,000. Now, this is one of the cases that we're going to run into through the evening that demonstrates exactly what Walter was saying about vote profile analysis. Those tabulated votes, we don't know where they're from. They're obviously from Goldwater areas, but our VPA precincts reporting from areas that we know and can tag and where we know what kinds of groups are voting how indicate that President Johnson will do probably 10 percentage points better than John Kennedy did in losing the state in 1960, and will win by 54% of the vote when it's over. Out in Kansas, there's a fairly substantial popular vote insofar, and it illustrates a point. President Johnson is leading Senator Goldwater by about 5,000 votes, 80,000 to 75,000, with about 9% of the state in. This is significant only insofar as it relates to the race for governor, where the Republican candidate, William Avery, is leading Harry Wiles, the Democrat, by 14,000 votes. This bears out what was predicted, that this would be a year of heavy ticket splitting.
And Harry, one final item in South Carolina, where Negro registration was up about 145%. Some of the machine ballots and machines in South Carolina have broken down, according to the officials there. They're having to resort to paper ballots, and the final count in South Carolina may be delayed. Walter?
We're going now down to our regular CBS newsroom, just below our election headquarters here, where Charles Kuralt is going to report on the day's other political news for us. Charles? Older President Johnson said today, "I think I'll win." It's a horse race, said Senator Goldwater. You either win it or you lose it. Whatever the Lord wants, I'll live with it. The president and the senator from Arizona both voted early today. So did millions of other Americans. Democrats might hope this big turnout means their side's not as apathetic as was feared, that the vote is big for President Johnson. Republicans might read this big volume of votes as a sign that all those silent voters Barry Goldwater kept talking about are speaking out at last. But for the story of one sure vote for the Democrats, we go to CBS News White House correspondent Dan Rather.
The president was at the wheel of his white Lincoln as he and the missus drove 15 miles from the ranch into Johnson City. Mr. Johnson looked tired, but he was smiling and campaigning all the way into the Pedernales Electric Cooperative building, where his voting precinct was set up in a kitchen. The president greeted all 8 precinct officials on a first-name basis as he and Mrs. Johnson were given their ballots. Besides the 8 voting officials, there were 5 Secret Service men, 4 reporters, and 22 photographers in the kitchen-turned-polling place. There are no booths or voting machines in the room. The Johnsons sat at the same table as precinct officials, making no effort to cover their ballots. The president marked his in bold strokes, taking just 1 minute and 10 seconds to vote the straight Democratic ticket. He stuffed with emphasis his ballot into a small metal box, then rode off to the ranch for breakfast. This is CBS News correspondent Dan Rather with the presidential party in Johnson City, Texas.
Senator Goldwater voted in his hometown of Phoenix, and he split his ticket. CBS News reporter Dave Shoemaker reports.
There was a long line waiting to vote when Barry and Peggy Goldwater arrived at their neighborhood polling place in the Phoenix Country Day School. The turnout in the well-to-do Paradise Valley section was heavy, and the 4 voting machines couldn't handle the business. Officials offered to move them to the head of the line, but the Goldwaters said they'd wait, and they did for an hour and 20 minutes. They passed the time signing autographs, shaking hands, and chatting with old friends. When the senator's turn finally came, he spent 90 seconds behind the curtains. Later admitted he'd voted for a few Democrats. Then, as he left, he was asked about his Election Day philosophy.
Oh, I never get worried on Election Day. You either win or you lose. There's no tie in this business.
Which way do you think it's going to go at this point?
It's going my way. Come on, honey.
Me.
Where are the boys?
You want to take it? You got to take it. How about that? I know what you're doing.
This is CBS News reporter Dave Shoemaker in Phoenix.
Supporters of Senator Goldwater mounted their Operation Eagle Eye today to watch the polls, and Democrats in many cities were keeping an eagle eye on the operation, suspecting it might be used to intimidate Democratic voters. For a story on this unprecedented poll-watching effort, we switch to New Orleans and CBS News correspondent Lou Wood.
There's strong Goldwater sentiment in Louisiana, and the young and finely tuned Goldwater organization here has 4 times as many poll watchers and commissioners out this time than they did in 1960. If they spot voting irregularities, they report to a ballot security control center like this one at the Republican headquarters in New Orleans. With the help of mobile telephones and 2-way radios, the control center dispatches a roving troubleshooter to the poll.
Would you connect me with YJ88? 323, please. And the voter gets ready to pull the machine to.
Hello, this is YJ88323, New Orleans.
Hester, we have a report of trouble in the 4th Ward, the 1st precinct. The report is that they have 2 machines. One machine has been shut down, and voters are turning away. Would you proceed to that area and check out the trouble and then call the mechanic at the warehouse and report the trouble to him?
Okay, I'm on my way.
So far, most of the trouble here has been voting machine breakdowns, which slow up the voting. Republicans say the local election officials aren't equipped to spot breakdowns fast enough, and their communications network is a public service. The Metropolitan Director of the Goldwater Committee says all voters, both Republican and Democratic, benefit by Operation Eagle Eye. But Democrats say it is merely a form of voter intimidation and should be called Operation Evil Eye. This is CBS News correspondent Lou Wood in New Orleans.
The Democrats have challenged this Republican operation in a number of places today. In Miami, a circuit court judge issued an injunction against Citizens for Goldwater, banning illegal mass vote challenging without cause. And bitter charges that Negroes were being prevented from voting by Republicans came from Maryland and South Carolina. There were various other complaints from both sides in Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Benton, Kentucky, all a result of the Vote Watchers' work and the work of the Vote Watchers' watchers. In Mississippi today, the largely Negro Freedom Democratic Party announced the results of its mock election, the election designed to prove that the small number of Negro voters in that state is the product of intimidation and not apathy. The result, 59,663 votes for Johnson and 14 votes for Goldwater. Walter Cronkite will be back with you from our CBS News election headquarters in a moment. As we were reporting to you a short while ago, the first two states that our vote profile analysis has indicated can be placed in a won or lost column have now been recorded on our CBS scoreboard here. Indiana and Kentucky, with a total of 22 electoral votes going to Lyndon Baines Johnson. Certainly the president, seeking his first term in the White House in his own right, has jumped into a very early lead on this election day. He's taken a Republican state that Senator Goldwater had said he needed, Indiana, and he's won a border state that Senator Goldwater had high hopes in, Kentucky. Of course, it takes 270 electoral votes to win this contest, and there are a lot of states where they're still voting at this very hour, and a lot of returns to be posted up there before we can say who is the winner on this election night. Let's go to the presidential desk here at our CBS News election headquarters and get some more details on those races that we have now been able to declare.
Walter, in Indiana, where President Johnson is the indicated winner, the popular vote now shows him with 83,000 votes to 68,000 for Senator Goldwater, with about 7% of the vote reporting. Earlier, Senator Goldwater was in the lead, but even then, our VPA precincts, which were from all over the state, indicated that President Johnson would win. Now it appears that his final percentage will be about 55% to Senator Goldwater's 45%, which just exactly reverses what happened 4 years ago. Nixon took Indiana by 55 to 45. President Johnson seems to be running well all over the state. He's doing very well in Indianapolis. He's doing well in the Gary and industrial areas where there was some thought that there might be a white backlash, particularly after George Wallace did well there last spring. He's doing very well in the normally Republican upper and middle income areas, and he's running strongly in the suburbs. And he's running stronger than John Kennedy among the Catholics. It looks like a sweep for him in Indiana. Roger?
Now, Harry, in the South, the president, according to VPA, already has won in Kentucky, which is a good key state for the upper South, the border South. But if we can take a quick look at South Carolina, which would furnish us a key for the deep South, you'll see that Lyndon Johnson and Barry Goldwater are very close. Goldwater in the lead by 11,888, Johnson 11,413. Just commenting briefly on South Carolina. Its well-known Democratic Senator Strom Thurmond moved over to the Republican Party in early September. We'll watch that race to see what influence Thurmond's switch had, and also whether or not Lyndon Johnson can break the expected victory of Barry Goldwater down there, because if he can block Barry Goldwater in South Carolina, in all likelihood, Goldwater's victory in the South would be much more limited than the Republican strategist had hoped for. Walter?
Gentlemen, we've had our first indication on a senatorial race. I hope we can get back to it in a moment, but right now, let's listen to this message. Bob Trout, I know that we've had a call on the race in Indiana. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, Walter. President Johnson's apparent victory in the state of Indiana is paralleled by an apparent victory for Vance Hartke, the Democratic senator who is running for a second term. With 8% of the state having reported, Hartke has 96,000. The Republican, the conservative Republican, Russell Bontrager, has 84,000. And the CBS IBM analysis of selected districts indicate that when all the vote is in, Vance Hartke will have 56% of the vote. Hartke is apparently the winner, Walter.
Bob, that big Johnson victory in Indiana looks like it may sweep the state. Mike Wallace, how about the gubernatorial race?
I just got through talking to Roger Brannigan, who's the Democratic candidate there, and as you can see, Walter, Roger Brannigan now has 101,700 on the tabulated vote, the popular vote in Indiana. Richard Ristine, 78,000 odd. But according to our VPA estimate, Brannigan is the winner with 56%. Brannigan said, "I'm very happy, and tell Walter I'm watching him."
Good. Thank you, Mike. Well, you might wonder what the big news might have been if this was not Election Day, but it is Election Day, and we'll be back in just a minute with complete coverage that ought to be of continuing interest far into the night. Long after we know who has won, we'll be finding out by how much, who he brought in with him. That's the way it's going to be, Tuesday, November 3rd, 1964. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
Direct from CBS News election headquarters in New York, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Stay tuned for CBS News coverage of Election Night 64, next on the CBS Television Network.
In order to bring you the election returns, our regularly scheduled Tuesday programs will not be seen tonight. The following program is brought to you as part of the continuing coverage by CBS News of Campaign 64, the presidential election year. Campaign 64, Election Night. Brought to you by the Institute of Life Insurance, on behalf of the life insurance companies in America and their agents. By Pell Mell, a cigarette for people who are particular about taste. And by Mobil, and more than 30,000 mobile dealers from coast to coast.
This is Walter Cronkite at our CBS News election headquarters. With my colleagues here, we'll be reporting this election to you throughout this election night. It looks like a record turnout throughout the United States today. Perhaps 71 million persons, maybe even more, have gone to the polls, and that's more than have ever voted before in a presidential election in this country. It might be the highest percentage ever if it gets up to 71.5 million or so. 2% of the vote has been counted so far. President Johnson has jumped into an early lead, 844,000 to Senator Goldwater's 571,000. That's 60% of the vote counted so far for Johnson, 40% for Goldwater. But the story is more important than that, because it looks as if Johnson is beginning to build up the landslide that had been predicted for him. Already with our vote profile analysis with IBM, we have been able to say that Johnson is indicated as the winner in Kentucky and in Indiana for a total of 22 electoral votes. Those are states that Senator Goldwater had hoped to win. He had really counted on the normally Republican state of Indiana. But his victory, Johnson's victory in Indiana, has also carried in the incumbent Senator Vance Hartke for another term and the Democratic candidate for governor. We want to get some details on all of those races that have come in now from the presidential side. Let's get the first rundown from our presidential desk, from Roger Mudd and from Harry Reisner. Gentlemen?
Walter, our first returns are coming in from the state of Ohio, which of course is one of the key states for Barry Goldwater as well as for Lyndon Johnson. And there, with scattered returns, Lyndon Johnson is in a slight lead, 2,900 to Goldwater's 1,600. But according to our early inconclusive VPA precincts from Ohio, Lyndon Johnson is enjoying no bad results from a backlash. He's running much better than John Kennedy did in the first industrial precinct we have to report. And the first Negro precinct to report in Ohio went 99.9% for Lyndon Johnson. In the state of Kentucky, which VPA says President Johnson has won, the president ran better than John Kennedy in all areas of Kentucky. 80% of the popular vote in, with Johnson 567,170 to Goldwater's 329,021. VPA shows that President Johnson ultimately will pull in 62% of the popular vote in Kentucky. And if we can refer just momentarily, go back to Ohio, there President Johnson is now the probable winner in the state of Ohio. If he can take Ohio, as most pollsters predict, he would come very close to succeeding beyond his expectations in the industrial Midwest. Harry?
Roger, as you remember, Senator Goldwater said many times that Ohio was one of the 4 key states he had to take. Well, if he has lost it, and the VPA says he probably has, one of the other things he said was, well, then he'd take Indiana and a couple of others. Well, of course, he's lost Indiana. President Johnson has a 20,000 vote lead in the tabulated votes, 133,000, 113,000, with 11% of the vote in. But our VPA precincts indicate that he will win the state 55% to 45%, just reversing the 1960 thing. It's a particularly key state because Indiana was one of the places where during the primaries among Democrats there was some sign of white resentment of the civil rights struggle. George Wallace did very well there. It was a state that is normally Republican, but tonight it's all for President Johnson. Out in the Midwest, there's not too many votes come in yet, but in Kansas, a fairly substantial popular vote, 14% of the state, shows President Johnson still leading. He's been leading through all these votes, 87,000, almost 88,000, to Senator Goldwater's 81,000. However, we aren't sure where those tabulated votes are from, and our study of key precincts as yet does not enable us to say whether that means he's going to win or not.
Harry, we could go back just a moment to Ohio. You'll find that President Johnson is running a strong race in Ohio this evening by a substantial margin. And with the industrial Northeast, that is around Cleveland and Akron coming in, and Cincinnati well represented, it looks like he's going to have spectacular gains in Ohio to take that state by several 100,000. Walter?
Gentlemen, you know, on the basis of these early returns, you probably could fairly safely predict Johnson victory already tonight at this early stage, but that's not the way the game's really played. It's played as you build up this electoral vote. It is building up rapidly for Johnson already with, as you have pointed out, 2 of the key states that Goldwater had counted in his column already falling to Johnson. But it takes 270 of those electoral votes to win. So far, we've got Johnson with 1 and probable 48, with Ohio in the probable column and Indiana and Kentucky in the 1 column. Campaign 64, our CBS News coverage of the presidential election, will continue in just a moment. Our vote profile analysis indicates that Senator Goldwater has won the state of Mississippi, as had been predicted for him. VPA IBM says that Goldwater has chalked up a victory in Mississippi, the first state that we have recorded for him this evening. President Johnson has won on our VPA analysis Connecticut, Maryland, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. So the electoral count is 66 for Johnson now and 7 for Goldwater as they work toward that 270 electoral votes it takes to win. In the popular vote, 3% of the vote in, Johnson 1,146,000, Goldwater 782,000. It's 59% of the vote in for Johnson, 41% of the vote that's in so far for Barry Goldwater. Gentlemen on the presidential desk, can you tell us about Mississippi?
Probably the best thing to say about Mississippi, Walter, is that in no state in the Union is President Johnson so unpopular. His defeat there was expected, and it's obviously based on the race issue and what they call in Mississippi federal interference with states' rights.
We'll continue now with regional election coverage from our affiliated CBS television stations, and we'll be back with more national coverage from our CBS News election headquarters in a few minutes.
CBS News coverage of election night continues. Brought to you by Mobil and more than 30,000 Mobil dealers from coast to coast, and by the Institute of Life Insurance on behalf of the life insurance companies in America and their agents.
Back at our CBS News election headquarters, where VPA IBM analysis says that Goldwater will be the winner in Alabama and in South Carolina. Added to the state of Mississippi, Goldwater's run is strong in the South, and he has now some 25 electoral votes on the basis of our vote profile analysis calls in those states. Lyndon Johnson, however, seems to be well on the way toward a landslide of northern and middle western border states. There we have him the winner in enough states for a total of 66 electoral votes. with some 4% of the popular vote counted. Let's look at the boards. 4% of the vote counted, 1,457,000 votes for Johnson, 949,000 for Goldwater. That means that Johnson's percentage, which has been bouncing from 61 down to 59%, is, as you see there, just back up to 61%, and Goldwater at 39%. Some of the states that have been won so far, we now can say from VPA that North Carolina is probably in the Johnson column. Johnson is a probable winner in North Carolina. Let's take a look at the state-by-state rundown. In the East, we have Johnson the winner in Connecticut and in Maryland for a total of 18 electoral votes in the East. In the Midwest, Johnson has won Indiana and Ohio with the big block of 39 electoral votes from those two states. In the South, Johnson has won Kentucky with 9 electoral votes and is now, as we just reported to you, in our probable column, North Carolina with 13 more electoral votes. Goldwater has won in Alabama, Mississippi, and in South Carolina. Let's go now out to the Middle West, look at a typical precinct as this nation goes to the polls today. And let me remind you before we go out there that while we are reporting several states already in the won or lost column on this election night, many of the polls across the nation still remain open. The election is a very important one in each of those states as well as in those already posted here at our election headquarters. A lot of local races still to be decided, and everyone is still saying west of the Mississippi and in a lot of eastern states, get out and vote. Let's go now to Hughes Rudd at the Rosenwald School in Chicago.
Walter, the votes have been counted here unofficially, and President Johnson has won in Precinct 14 here on the southwest side of Chicago, but he certainly didn't win by very much. He got 286 votes. Mr. Goldwater got 260. That's much closer than it was in 1960 when Mr. Kennedy carried it with 369 to Mr. Nixon's 187. And there was a lot of ticket splitting going on. Governor Kerner lost the precinct by 256 to Charles Chuck Percy, the Republican candidate, who got 288. The reasons for this, as I said a little earlier, a lot of these people moved out here in the last 5 or 10 years and suddenly became homeowners. And the theory is that that suddenly turned them overwhelmingly into Republicans. Well, if it did, just enough of them still preferred Mr. Johnson to Mr. Goldwater, of course, and there was also some backlash here, undoubtedly. This is CBS News correspondent Hughes Rudd in Precinct 14 in Chicago.
We've just moved Lyndon Johnson from the probable to the won column in North Carolina. North Carolina, according to VPA IBM vote profile analysis, indicates that Johnson is the winner in North Carolina. Perhaps our presidential desk can tell us more about that race.
We are observing this evening a fairly major and significant change in the voting pattern, whereas in past elections the Democratic nominee normally ran well in what is known as the Tidewater or the Black Belt, the cotton and tobacco economies of the South. We are seeing this evening that the Republican nominee, Barry Goldwater, is the one who's running well in the farming and deep South sections. Lyndon Johnson, although he has, according to VPA, taken North Carolina, did run in this evening to some white voter resentment. He ran behind John Kennedy's pace in these rural areas, but where he made his victory, fashioned his victory, was in Charlotte, the industrial section around Charlotte, and in Mecklenburg County, and in the Raleigh-Durham area, where the tobacco industry is, and the University of North Carolina complex. The Negroes are going for Mr. Johnson by better than 99%. Now, in Alabama, we have an indicated a winner in Alabama. Barry Goldwater has, on the basis of the popular vote there, he's pulled in 12,948 to the unpledged electoral slate of 5,024. On the basis of vote profile analysis, however, Goldwater will win in Alabama. Alabama was the only state in the Union where you couldn't vote directly for Lyndon Johnson. That's an unpledged electoral slate there, formerly bound of Governor Wallace, who released them about 6 or 8 weeks ago. In Florida, if we can take a quick look at the other southern states, Florida, Johnson 45,131, Goldwater 43,080. 6% of the vote in. Georgia, Goldwater is out to an early lead in the counting at least. Goldwater 11,548, Johnson 9,551. Kentucky, Mr. Johnson is the winner according to vote profile analysis. 91% of the vote is in there. Johnson 630,736, Goldwater 349,567. Mississippi, President Johnson is the winner in Mississippi. The popular vote so far tabulated, Goldwater 9,988, Lyndon Johnson but 1,353. North Carolina, President Johnson is the probable winner there. The popular vote gives him 96,557. Senator Goldwater 76,253. But vote profile analysis in North Carolina shows President Johnson with 54% of the total vote. Oklahoma, President Johnson with very scattered returns, leading by about 1,500 votes. Johnson 1,584, the senator 1,038. South Carolina, Barry Goldwater is the winner there on the basis of vote profile analysis. The popular vote, Goldwater 58,196, President Johnson 43,584. That's about 30% of the total vote in South Carolina. Johnson, may I correct myself, is the probable winner in North Carolina. I think I gave him the state inadvertently. Tennessee, two more states in the South. Tennessee with 34% of the popular vote in. President Johnson leading fairly easily there. 74,896 to Goldwater 60,122. And finally, the state of Virginia with very few popular votes in, but Goldwater inconclusively leading 912 to 821. Harry, that's the 13 states of the South.
Well, Roger, in your area, especially the South, there's a lot more happening than in my area of the East. So far in the East, we've given President Johnson apparent victories in Connecticut and in Maryland. And in Maryland, it's interesting to note that he won in spite of the first real evidence we've seen tonight of this white resentment that had been expected to be a factor. In the city of Baltimore, in the area of predominantly Polish voters and in areas where they work in steel, Barry Goldwater is running about 9% ahead of what Richard Nixon did 4 years ago when John Kennedy took the state. But on the other hand, President Johnson is running well ahead in the Eastern Shore area where there have been some civil rights trouble. The guess is that John Kennedy's Catholicism hurt him more than civil rights is hurting President Johnson. There'll be more from the East later. Walter?
I think we might remember again, gentlemen, that only 14 states have actually closed their polls so far. So much of this nation of ours is still lined up at the polling places, still casting their ballots. But with the remarkable speed of our new vote collection machinery through NES, the Network Election Service, in which all of us are cooperating tonight, our vote count is actually about twice as fast as it was in 1960. And we're able to say, we are here at CBS, that already Johnson has won 66 electoral votes and the probable winner of 13 others, 79 electoral votes, and that's well on the way toward the 270 he needs. We can now state also on the basis of vote profile analysis that President Johnson has carried that rock-ribbed New England state of Vermont. He's carried Vermont, and we expect it to be by the sizable proportion of 62%. In the popular vote, not even 1% of the vote has been counted yet, but we are able, through our selected precincts in Vermont, to say that the 3 electoral votes of that New England state are going to Lyndon Johnson, and it's about 63% of the electorate will be in his column. Campaign 64, our CBS News coverage of the presidential election, will continue in just a moment. We now have 4% of the nation's vote tabulated, and Lyndon Johnson has a lead, 1,750,000 to Senator Goldwater's 1,173,000, and in percentage, that's 60% for Lyndon Johnson and 40% for Barry Goldwater. That's just about the percentage that had been predicted by the pollsters, and the Johnson percentage has bounced between about 61 and 59% as these very early returns have come in. Bob Trout, I know that you've got something to tell us from the congressional desk, an interesting race in Maryland, for instance.
Well, I have an interesting race in Maryland, Walter. First, if you don't mind, I have one in Connecticut, too, where a Democratic senator has been reelected, we think. CBS News IBM vote profile analysis indicates, at least, that on the basis of the 44% of the tabulated votes that have been counted, that Senator Dodd will win his second term when all the votes are counted by 62%, which is slightly less than President Johnson's winning percentage in Connecticut. Senator Dodd was challenged by the Republican John Davis Lodge, the brother of Henry Cabot Lodge, a former governor of Connecticut. John Davis Lodge was also once United States ambassador to Spain, where the Spaniards called him the happy ambassador. As a matter of fact, once in the old Spanish city of Cadiz, I was with Ambassador Lodge as he charmed the Spanish audience by singing Deep in the Heart of Texas. And that's where John Davis Lodge is tonight, deep in the heart of, caught in the Texas landslide of President Johnson and, of course, the great popularity of Democratic Senator Dodd, who's winning re-election by 62%, which is 5% higher than he did in his first Senate race 6 years ago. Senator Dodd's better showing comes from all parts of the state, too. Walter, as you mentioned, Maryland, let's take a look at what is happening in that state where Joseph Tidings, the son of the late Millard Tidings, a great senator for 26 years, a Democrat, looks like the winner. He is the apparent winner on the basis of the 10% of the votes that have been tabulated. Our vote profile analysis estimate is that Joseph Tidings will have 62% of the votes, and Republican Senator J. Glenn Bell, a liberal Republican trying for his third term, will end with only 38% when all the votes have been counted. Senator Bell was considered the Republicans' greatest risk in this election, as Ohio was considered the Democrats' greatest risk. Of course, that's before any of the votes were counted this evening. And in Ohio, Senator Stephen Young, the Democrat, with only 5% of the votes tabulated, seems to hold that slim margin over Robert Taft, Jr., one of the most promising young men in the Republican Party. Of course, Robert Taft is running way, way ahead of Senator Goldwater in Ohio, but he is trailing Senator Young 95,900, as you saw, as we could see, looking at some of the figures here in Ohio. Florida is a race in which a veteran Senator, Spessard Holland, probably could have won no matter who ran against him, and although only 6% of the votes are in, Spessard Holland has 48,000 to the 25,000 of Claude Kirk. And Walter will be back with startling news on the state of Mississippi next time.
All right, Bob. We have a CBS IBM vote profile analysis now on the state of Wisconsin, and it says that Johnson is the probable winner in Wisconsin. We now have 5% of the popular vote counted, 2,079,000 for Johnson, 1,419,000 for Goldwater. That's 60% of the tabulated vote for Johnson and 40% for Goldwater. In the electoral vote, we at CBS News, our CBS News, VPA, IBM analysis, have called Johnson the winner in enough states for 82 electoral votes, the probable winner. In Wisconsin, that's 12 electoral votes for a total of 94 electoral votes for Johnson. Goldwater is the winner in Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina, and that adds up to 25 electoral votes for Senator Goldwater. Gentlemen on the presidential desk, give us a closer look at the race.
Walter, just a word or two about Wisconsin, where, as you just reported, Lyndon Johnson is the probable winner on the basis of the vote profile analysis. Apparently from our VPA precincts, we can tell that the president is making dramatic gains in Wisconsin compared to the run John Kennedy made 4 years ago, making those dramatic gains in the rural sections of the state as much as 15% more than Kennedy got in a number of those rural precincts. And the president is showing much the same sort of gains in Madison, in the central part of the state, which is where John Kennedy made his lowest mark 4 years ago. Also making good gains in the western area of Wisconsin around Eau Claire. Nothing yet from the great Democratic stronghold of Milwaukee. Harry?
I'd suggest, Roger, without having surveyed any special precincts at all, that probably one of the reasons President Johnson is doing better than John Kennedy did is that John Kennedy had to run there in a primary against Hubert Humphrey, and Humphrey made some pretty effective criticism of him in June that probably showed up in November. But of course, this time, President Johnson benefits from Senator Humphrey. In the East, we have assigned Connecticut, Maryland, and Vermont to President Johnson's column with no indication that Senator Goldwater is making any progress anywhere. In Connecticut, which is one of the early states that went for John Kennedy, 64% of the vote has been tabulated. President Johnson is leading 488,000 to 224,000. And according to our survey of the state, our VPA estimate, the total, when it's all over, the president will have won by about 66% of the vote.
Harry, you know, Connecticut is one of 8 states, I think, that Barry Goldwater did not campaign in.
He kind of wrote that off from the beginning.
I think he did, yes.
In Maryland, where I think there was some thought that Senator Goldwater might have had a chance, that's one of those states, too, where there was believed to be white resentment. The state where George Wallace, in effect, carried the white vote in the Democratic primary. President Johnson has won there with 20% of the vote tabulated. He's got a very big lead, 112,000 to 68,000. And our VPA study of key precincts indicates his final percentage will be about 65% to about 35%. I think, have you got a bulletin from Florida?
If you don't mind my breaking in on you, we've got a probable winner in the state of Florida. According to our vote profile breakdown, President Johnson probably will be the winner in Florida, around 54%. There's the popular vote, 14%, but on the basis of VPA, he is the probable winner of 54-46.
And that's one of the places where they thought might be a real horse race, where
always regarded as a toss-up, the balance of the liberal South around Miami and the conservative Panhandle.
President Johnson has also won in West Virginia with its 7 electoral votes, and he's apparently won by a whopping percentage. Our VPA study of key precincts in West Virginia indicates that he'll, in spite of the fact there's very little popular vote, that he'll take the state by about 67%. West Virginia, of course, is where John Kennedy campaigned on a program to help the state, and so was President Johnson.
John Kennedy carried West Virginia, I think, by about 52% against Richard Nixon. All right, Walter.
We're going to return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, the percentage for Lyndon Johnson's lead in this early stage of election night has dropped a percentage. He's got 2,274,000 votes to 1,682,000 for Goldwater. That's with 6% of the vote counted. Let's take a look at that again. With 6% of the vote counted, Lyndon Johnson now has 2,391,000 votes. Goldwater, 1,682,000. They changed as we were on the air. Now the percentage, as you see, Johnson has 59% and Goldwater 41%. That's a percent drop for Johnson. It was holding at about 60% up to the last few minutes. But the indications are, as we have said earlier, that it is building up toward a Johnson landslide tonight, with Senator Goldwater holding firm only in the South so far. Of course, we haven't heard from those states where the polls are still open, many areas of the Middle West and the West, as well as some of those in the East. Mike Wallace, can you tell us about the gubernatorial races?
We have one call, Walter. In the state of Florida, Democrat Hayden Burns, who's been a strong favorite all along, has been indicated by vote profile analysis as the winner. On the tabulated return, he has about 92,000 votes. Charles Hawley, about 60,000 votes. On vote profile analysis, though, Burns is shown as running somewhat ahead of the president. I believe that Lyndon Johnson is running with about 54% of the vote in Florida. Hayden Burns has 60%. He is the conservative mayor of Jacksonville, Florida. His margin approximates that of Florida's mayor, Governor Ferris Bryant. Last time around, this whole contest in Florida was a contest between conservatives. Burns endorsed President Johnson, but he said he found a good many of the views of Senator Goldwater acceptable. And Charles Hawley defined his philosophy of government as limited to protecting possessors of property against those who possess nothing. Walter?
Mike, we're going to continue with regional election coverage from our affiliated CBS television stations, and we'll be back with more national coverage from our CBS News election headquarters in a few minutes.
This is the CBS Television Network.
Good evening. This is Walter Cronkite from our CBS News election headquarters in New York, continuing our evening-long coverage of this national election today. On the basis of our CBS IBM vote profile analysis, Lyndon Johnson is the indicated winner in the state of West Virginia, with his final percentage being probably about 67%. And also in the state of Florida, Spessard Holland is being returned to the Senate from Florida with a final vote of about 65%. We now have 6% of the national vote counted. Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey moving toward what, if this trend continues, is going to be an overwhelming victory. 2,983,000 votes to Barry Goldwater and William Miller's 2,100,000 votes. That's 59% of the recorded votes so far for Johnson and Humphrey, 41% for Goldwater and Miller. On the basis of our vote profile analysis, we have given enough states to Lyndon Johnson in our tabulation and our calculations for 89 electoral votes. We say he is the probable winner in 2 other states with a total of 26 electoral votes, which would make his total 115 electoral votes, moving on toward the halfway mark of the 270 electoral votes he needs to win. Senator Goldwater has won, according to VPA, in 3 states of the South: Alabama, Mississippi, as expected, South Carolina, which is believed to be touch and go, for a total of 25 electoral votes. It's noteworthy. One of the interesting features of this election night is the speed with which we're building up this total. At this time in 1960, we had about half as many votes counted, less than half as many votes counted as we do tonight. The fact that we're over the 5 million mark at this early stage of the evening and more than 6% of the vote counted is thanks to this amazing election machinery that has been built up under something called Network Election Service. All of the networks and the 2 wire services cooperating to put our own poll counters throughout the United States to speed these returns to you. They're coming to you faster than they ever have before in any election ever before. We might remind you that besides that tabulated total, we're giving you our vote profile analysis, our system, our tool by which we can, looking at selected precincts, tell how a state is going long before the total vote is in for that state. Now let's take a look at our presidential races from our presidential desk, where Harry Reasoner and Roger Mudd are presiding. Gentlemen?
Walter, if we can shift our emphasis from the South now and move into the Middle West, which will open up a whole new world to us, Harry. In Illinois, very early returns there show that Lyndon Johnson is leading in Illinois in the Chicago suburbs with about 2% of the vote in. Goldwater 49,192, Johnson 48,784. Those very early returns are from the Chicago suburbs. None is in yet from Chicago City, and no Negro precincts are in. I think before we start to check all the Midwest boards, we take a recap and just check the popular vote in the Midwest. You can see there that Lyndon Johnson is about 300,000 votes ahead of Barry Goldwater, just on what we've heard so far, 883,601 to Goldwater's 573,056. And on the basis of our probable winners and our winners, according to vote profile analysis, Lyndon Johnson has piled up a total of 58 electoral votes, 12 probable and 46 he has won, according to VPA. Resuming our check of the Midwest states, we've done Illinois. In Indiana, Lyndon Johnson there is the winner, according to vote profile analysis. Nothing in yet from Iowa. In Kansas, with 26% of the popular vote in, Johnson is out ahead with about a 10,000 vote lead. Johnson 128,867, Goldwater 118,965. And that lead there, Harry, is from the rural wheat sections of Kansas, and we have yet to get the heavy vote in from Kansas City and Wichita, which will, from all indications, give Johnson an even greater lead in Kansas. Michigan...
Roger, if I can just interrupt your running of that Midwest board for a moment. VPA says that Oklahoma is probably going to go for President Johnson. It's early yet. When the tabulated votes, less than 2% of them in, Mr. Johnson has a strong lead, but it's early yet to pick an exact or even approximate percentage that he'll finish with. But he is the probable winner in Oklahoma, which will give him an additional 8 electoral votes if it stays in his column.
In the Oklahoma race, you have eliminated the Catholic issue this time, which figured so heavily in Kennedy's
all the way through. Apparently, it's interesting to see how heavy a burden that Catholicism was in 1960. I don't think it would be now, but it was that first time.
We had paused just briefly at the Michigan board, but really there's no point in pausing there, and we can pass Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, nothing from those states. Pause at Ohio, and you'll find that that highly industrialized Midwestern state, according to VPA, President Johnson has taken. The popular vote, 10% of it in, shows Johnson 272,606, to Barry Goldwater's 164,350. And in West Virginia, President Johnson there, according to VPA, is the winner, retaining West Virginia, the scene of John Kennedy's first and greatest triumph, I suppose, on his road to the White House, with 24,383 for Johnson, 11,324 for Senator Goldwater. And finally, Wisconsin, with a small percentage of the popular vote in. Johnson leads 29,692 to Goldwater's 21,836. And the lead that Johnson enjoys in Wisconsin is a lead that really yet doesn't depend on the Democratic stronghold of Milwaukee.
But the VPA study of the precincts around Wisconsin indicates, or is that President Johnson is the probable winner there. Walter?
Harry and Roger, it seems to me the amazing thing about these figures you fellows have been giving there is the percentages that VPA says Lyndon Johnson is going to win by in these states. It is certainly of landslide proportions. Anything over 53, 54% is usually considered landslide, and he hasn't carried a state yet by less than that. 61% in Connecticut, 55% in Indiana, which was a touch-and-go state, 61% in Kentucky, 60% in Maryland, 63% in Vermont, for goodness sakes, and 67% in West Virginia, 60% in Ohio, 54% in North Carolina. Well, it looks like certainly he's going to, with that kind of percentage, he's got to carry with him state tickets, state legislatures, Senate, gubernatorial candidates in almost every case.
This was the great fear, that if this landslide, either it's for Lyndon Johnson or against Barry Goldwater, it's hard to tell now, but if this landslide sweeping the president into office materialized, the great danger for the Republican Party was that everybody, only the strongest would survive, and that the damage to the Republican Party could well be of lasting effect.
One precinct up in Vermont where the change in percentage points from John Kennedy was 29%. 29% more went for Lyndon Johnson.
Well, Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election, will continue in just a moment. Our VPA analysis indicates that Lyndon Johnson is the probable winner for Illinois' big block of 26 electoral votes. We don't have a percentage to be given assigned to Lyndon Johnson by VPA in Illinois yet, but we will get that for you shortly. But Illinois now joins the march of states in the Johnson column. Let's take a look at the states that VPA says have gone for Johnson. Connecticut, Maryland, and Vermont in the east, with, of course, a lot of big states yet undecided in the east. The New York polls, for instance, don't even close for another 50 minutes. In the, there are no Goldwater states in the east as yet. In the Midwest, Indiana and Ohio and West Virginia are in the Johnson column as one, and we have 2 states in the probable column for Johnson, Illinois and Wisconsin. None of the states in the Middle West for Goldwater as yet. In the South, Lyndon Johnson has won Kentucky and North Carolina, and he is the probable winner in Florida and Oklahoma. It is in the South where Senator Goldwater has racked up his 3 state victories and his total of 25 electoral votes in Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Eric Silverride, it's been a long time since we've had a chance to get over to you this evening. How do you look on this thing?
There's something stunning about this, Walter. If a landslide means that the earth moves and changes the landscape as we've known it, I think our political landscape has certainly been changed. The state of Vermont has not gone Democratic since the Republican Party was founded in 1856. Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina in the South have not gone Republican since those unnatural days of the Reconstruction period right after the Civil War. These are extraordinary and historic changes. A universal phenomenon seems to be building up here. The breakover point, the thing that does divide us, to quote one of the campaign phrases, is again the race matter as far as state majority feelings go. It is still with us in that part of the South, certainly those 3 states. He is running bigger, Mr. Johnson, than Mr. Kennedy 4 years ago. What seems to be building up, from what figures and projections we have, would appear to be a victory on the order, at least, of Mr. Eisenhower's in '56, possibly as high as FDR's in 1936. If Mr. Johnson does rack up a popular vote majority of 60% or better, he will be one of only 3 presidents who have done that in the last 140 years, as long as we have the records on popular voting in this country. The other 2 were FDR in '36 and Harding in 1920. There is a big change in very hard rock Republican voting, as we've seen from some of the rich suburban areas in the Midwest, in states like Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, where Mr. Johnson, the Democrat, has cut in. This is a very deep-seated change, as is the switch to Republicans in the back hills in the south of several states. It looks, at this early hour at least, as though the theory of Mr. Taft that was carried on by Mr. Goldwater and his friends is being exploded. The theory that if a real conservative were nominated by the Republican Party, so many conservatives would come out, thus encouraged, who had not voted before, that a victory could be put together. If that cannot happen in a state like Indiana or Vermont, where Johnson is winning big, certainly the theory has not held up this time. Back to you, Walter.
Eric, VPA says that New Jersey can now be put in the win column for Lyndon Johnson. That's 17 more electoral votes. In New Jersey, you see just a tiny smattering of the popular vote has been recorded by NES so far, but on the basis of our selected precincts with this new reporting tool, which helps us to judge quickly how an election has gone, that's VPA, we're able to say that Johnson is the winner in New Jersey, and his probable percentage will be 61% of the vote. Another state he's taken by more than 60%. In other words, about the figure that the polls had indicated he would win by in those states. That gives him now more than half of the electoral votes he needs toward victory. He has won 106 electoral votes. He's the probable winner in 60 for 60 more, for a total of 166. Goldwater has won 25 in 3 southern states. And now Pennsylvania, with 29 electoral votes, according to VPA, is a Johnson state. With the very few votes actually counted in Pennsylvania, VPA can say that Johnson is the winner there, and his percentage in Pennsylvania, as in New Jersey and in other states, over 60%, 61% of the vote in Pennsylvania. Bob Trout, a lot of congressional races have been racked up on the board since we've had a chance to get over there to your desk. Can you give us a fill-in on them?
Walter, perhaps we could consider the Senate as a whole for a moment. There are 35 races for the United States Senate this year, and of those 35 seats that are up, 1/3 of the Senate, of course, 26 of them are Democrats, Democratic seats, and 9 of them are Republicans. Perhaps we'd better skip to the House of Representatives, where 218 are needed to control the House of Representatives, and I thought perhaps we'd have some figures. Yes, the Democrats have now indicated it is now indicated that that 109 Democratic representatives have been elected and 53 Republican representatives. The present House is 254 Democrats, the rest Republicans. Now, to look at a separate state, in Florida, Senator Spencer Holland, the Democratic senator who is trying for his 4th term and who was figured to have no trouble getting it, has apparently got it very easily, even though 27% of the votes only have been tabulated, and Senator Holland there has 258,000 to the 145,000 of the Republican challenger Claude Kirk, who is a 38-year-old former Marine. The vote profile estimate is that when the votes are counted, Senator Holland will have 64% of all of them. In the state of West Virginia, the Democratic incumbent, one of the 2 senators in this race whose name is Byrd, this is Senator Robert Byrd, the Democrat, is easily defeating Cooper Benedict, a horse breeder and, more important, an early Republican supporter of Senator Goldwater, which has obviously hurt him very badly. Senator Byrd is winning 2-1. It's Byrd 9,000, Benedict 4,000, and the vote profile analysis indicates that Senator Robert Byrd's percentage at the end will be 67% of the vote, about the same as President Johnson's in West Virginia. Senator Robert Byrd is running well ahead of his 1958 margin when he got about 59% of the vote, running ahead of his 58 figures in Republican areas of West Virginia as well as the Democratic areas. And his Senate votes against civil rights and the nuclear test ban don't seem to have hurt him a bit. And now, Walter, to the startling news about Mississippi that I promised you about half an hour ago. John Stennis, the Democratic senator, has won his 3rd full term in Mississippi, even though we don't have a single figure counted in the Senate race in Mississippi, because Senator Stennis is in the fortunate position of having no opposition at all. Nobody challenged him.
Good golly, Bob, if you told us that's what you were holding over there, we'd have gone to you immediately. Didn't have any idea you were sitting on such a bombshell. Well, perhaps, except for the size of the Lyndon Johnson vote, it's the only bombshell we've had tonight, I guess, in a way. It has been remarkable that Johnson has won so many of the states already in the northern and central belt where it had been expected that Barry Goldwater would do better, and it is remarkable that his percentage is as high as it is. It also might be noted that Lyndon Johnson on the presidential ticket is running quite a long way ahead of his running mates on state tickets in several states, indicating quite a lot of split voting going on. In Ohio, for instance, Johnson is running about 2-1, stronger than incumbent Senator Stephen Young in Ohio. In Michigan, he's running about 2-1 ahead of his senatorial running mate Neil Stabler in that state. Well, that's a gubernatorial race, excuse me. Neil Stabler running against Romney in Michigan. And in Illinois, he's running, Johnson's actually running about 4-3 ahead of Otto Kerner for the gubernatorial race there. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. We're going immediately to Washington, D.C., to the Sheraton Park Hotel, National Republican headquarters, and Dean Birch.
Generally speaking, our gubernatorial and senatorial races are good, and the Congress races that we've heard anything about are holding up well. The other thing I'd like to point out is that, as we have said throughout this campaign, this ball game is going to be decided west of the Mississippi River, and I'd like to urge each of our supporters and workers and voters in the Midwest, the Rocky Mountain area, and the far west to redouble their efforts, because this thing is far from over. Thank you.
That was Dean Birch, the chairman of the National Republican Committee, speaking to the party of Republican workers at the Sheraton Park Hotel in Washington. We're going to be going back there occasionally during the course of the evening. You heard the text of his remarks. According to CBS IBM vote profile analysis, Lyndon Johnson now is the probable winner in Delaware, and the final vote should be around 57%, we anticipate, in Delaware for Lyndon Johnson. That's with 8% of the popular vote tabulated. The EPA says Johnson is the winner with 57%, his probable winning margin. Popular vote from the country as a whole, 9% of it is in. We're almost up to the 10% mark. And Lyndon Johnson has 3,952,000 votes to Senator Goldwater's 2,877,000 votes. That's 58% of the vote for Johnson and Humphrey, 42% for Goldwater and Miller. It might be noted that that percentage is down a little bit. It's been up as high as 61% earlier this evening, dropped down to 60, down to 59, and it is now down to 58%. But this is popular vote, unassigned by importance in the nation. We'll continue now with our regional electric coverage from our affiliated CBS television stations, and we'll be back with more national coverage from our CBS News election headquarters in a few minutes. This is Walter Cronkite at our CBS News election headquarters once again, and the story of this election night is Americans going to the polls in apparently record numbers and recording an apparent landslide victory for Lyndon Baines Johnson. With 9% of the popular vote counted, we can record that Texas has been won for Johnson and that Tennessee has been won for Johnson, building a large electoral vote for him, moving on very near to the 270 electoral votes he needs to win. But let's look at the popular vote first. The nationwide popular vote, 9% of that vote in, 4,361,000 votes for Johnson, 3,172,000 votes for Goldwater. Johnson's percentage over Goldwater standing at about 58 to 42% of that popular vote counted. But the big board is the electoral board, of course. That's the one that will tell the story. We elect not on popular vote, but on how the states vote with their electoral counts. And on that basis, CBS vote profile analysis has given Johnson 175 electoral votes. He is the probable winner in states with a total of 71 electoral votes. That puts his total at 246. He needs only 270, and at this very early hour of this election night, on the basis of our remarkable vote profile analysis machine, CBS, IBM, the Lewis Harris operation, we can say that Lyndon Johnson is very near to being elected president. Barry Goldwater has won 3 states, Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina, for a total of 25 electoral votes. Oklahoma, which we had put in the probable column for Lyndon Johnson earlier, is now definitely for Lyndon Johnson, and we are now able to say that Missouri has been carried by Johnson with a probable final percentage of 59%. Missouri, with 2% of the vote counted, 8,000 to 4,000, a 50% lead by Johnson there. But in the vote profile analysis estimate for those 12 electoral votes, 59% for Johnson and 41% the probable return. Let's go now to our presidential desk for a closer look at these races. Gentlemen?
Walter, Texas is the big one. It's one of the 4 states, the big 4 that Goldwater said he would have to have in order to win the presidency: Texas, Ohio, Indiana, and California. Of course, we have nothing on California, but we have reported, according to VPA, that President Johnson has lost Ohio and lost Indiana, and now, according to VPA, he is the probable loser in Texas. Lyndon Johnson, his home state, has gone to President Johnson. Our current VPA estimate would indicate that the president will pull in about 53% of the vote in Texas. In Tennessee, which is another good battleground this evening, Lyndon Johnson is continuing to run well across most of Tennessee. 181,973 for the president, 153,576 for the senator. No Negro precincts have reported, no Negro VPA precincts have reported yet in Tennessee, and the white voter resentment, that is the Southern white front lash probably, Southern resentment to the president is not showing up to any great extent. Georgia is also another tough fight for both men this evening. Goldwater is in the lead with the popular vote there, 105,534 to the president's 92,815. Apparently, Senator Goldwater is benefiting from a strong white voter resentment against President Johnson in the southern and eastern part of the states. We have no VPA reports in from Atlanta. And in Kansas, which was our first sizable return this evening. Kansas is so close now that we are not willing to call Kansas one way or the other. With 30% of the popular vote in, President Johnson leads 155,689 to the Senators 144,692. Most of that early popular vote was in from the Wheat Belt. We have yet to hear from Wichita and Kansas City, and it's really just too narrow a race to tip one way or the other, Harry.
Roger, in two states out in that area that you can call either Midwest or near Southwest, depending on what you want to, in Missouri, President Johnson, who had been the probable winner, our VPA now indicates he is the winner in Missouri. With only 2% of the popular vote in, this is a dramatic demonstration of how VPA, checking selected precincts, can predict and project what the final vote will be. We assume there'll be a percentage of about 59% for the president in Missouri. And in Oklahoma, President Johnson is the indicated winner. There they've got about 7% of the popular vote, with Mr. Johnson at 34,000, Senator Goldwater's 28,000. VPA indicates the final percentage will be 56% for the president. In the East, some of the big states with whopping electoral votes are coming in. Our VPA estimate is that President Johnson is the winner in Pennsylvania, as we announced previously, which puts a big 29 electoral votes in his pocket. There's 7% of the popular vote in Pennsylvania. Mr. Johnson leads 197,000 to 95,000. Our VPA estimate is that he will win the state by about 61% of the vote. And with our ability with VPA to see where the votes are coming from, he has got a big lead in what is normally Republican areas of Philadelphia and the suburbs around Philadelphia, plus a good deal of strength in virtually every other section of Pennsylvania.
Harry, we just had a call here, which is just getting there to your desk too, that Virginia is a probable for Johnson, but Illinois, with its big block of 26 electoral votes, is being called by VPA as a Johnson state. And according to my calculations, I don't think that has been posted on our electoral vote board yet. It will put Johnson over the top on the probables, not the one votes yet, but the probable votes. If he holds on to the four probable states we now have listed for him, Wisconsin, Florida, Tennessee, and Virginia, he is over the top for the presidency, the 270 electoral votes that he would need. He's now at 284 of one and probable. Back to you, gentlemen.
The only other note I had, Roger, was on New Jersey, where again, President Johnson is the winner. And again, he is going strong. He's doing very well in all parts of the state. He's doing well with the Catholic vote in New Jersey, which is a major factor there. He's doing very well in the industrial areas and in the suburbs along the northern New Jersey border outside New York, which are normally Republican. He's doing very well. He has with 10% of the popular vote, he's leading 160,000 to 75,000. Our estimated final percentage is about 61% to 39%.
Harry, I can fill in a little on Virginia. Walter announced the probable winner there, and Virginia was Lyndon Johnson. And this, if this trend continues and he does win Virginia, this will be the first time since 1948 that Virginia has gone Democratic. It went for Eisenhower 52, 56, and Richard Nixon in 1960. The key in Virginia, apparently, was the silence of Harry Byrd with the one hand, and on the other hand, permitting some of his top lieutenants in Virginia to conduct a Lyndon Johnson campaign. Incidentally, we've been talking considerably about VPA and the popular vote and just how accurate one and another is. I want to give you a little example of how accurate it is tonight. First, we announced that Lyndon Johnson is now, on the basis of vote profile analysis, the winner in Texas. The estimate is 61% of the popular vote in Texas will go to Lyndon Johnson. It's been almost 2.5 hours ago that we...
Before you give that example, Roger, can I interrupt you for just a moment? We have another estimate in the state of Rhode Island on the basis of our VPA precincts. Lyndon Johnson is the indicated winner there. The precincts are going strongly enough, in spite of that small tabulated vote so far, to indicate he's the winner, but we can't list a percentage yet. And the same thing is true in Massachusetts, John Kennedy's home state. This is now an indicated victory for Lyndon Johnson in Massachusetts. 2% of the popular vote in gives him 27,000 to Senator Goldwater 6,000. That's a big lead even with only 2%. But as yet, we aren't prepared to estimate a final percentage, but President Johnson is the winner. Now, try again, will you?
You promised.
I promise you can give you a little illustration.
I think it was 2.5 hours ago that vote profile analysis told us that when all the votes were in, President Johnson would be the winner of 64% of them. And at that time, we showed you the Kentucky board, and the popular vote in Kentucky was somewhere under 100,000 total. It looked strange at the time, but now if you look at that Kentucky board again, you'll find that 64% of the VPA estimate equals 674,469, which is exactly what Lyndon Johnson got in the popular vote.
Makes you feel pretty good to see the popular vote come right around to what you said it was going to.
Okay, Walter.
Something that intrigues me about this gentleman is that while Lyndon Johnson has been winning most of these states by over 60%, including Vermont by 63%, our probable final percentage there, he carried his home state of Texas by only 53%. So he's running further behind in Texas, although winning there, than he has in some of the other states. And also it indicates that Senator Ralph Yarborough, in his very tight race against George Bush in the Senate seat, may be in a little bit of trouble there. He was counting on a little heavier Johnson vote, I think, to pull him in. We'll find out more about that very shortly. Let's take a look at our electoral board now. As we reported to you a moment ago, Lyndon Johnson would appear to be over the top in the won and probable columns. 230 electoral votes he's won. He's ahead and the probable winner for 49 more electoral votes, which gives him 279 electoral votes. And that is 9 votes more than the 270 needed to win. Senator Goldwater has won 25 electoral votes in those 3 southern states that have been recorded for him by vote profile analysis: Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Let's take a look at the states which Johnson has won so far according to a VPA. In the East, he has won Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Vermont. The only outstanding states in the East yet are the District of Columbia, Maryland, New Hampshire, and New York, where the polls don't close for another 18 minutes. In the Midwest, Johnson has won Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, Ohio, Missouri that is, Ohio, and West Virginia. And he is a probable winner in Wisconsin. Still unheard from Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Many of those states, the polls are still open. And of course, the people there are going to be going to the polls not only to vote for the presidency, but for state races and Senate races, governorship races, all terribly important that they get to the polls and record their vote for those things. In the South, Johnson has won Kentucky, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Texas. And he's the probable winner in Florida, Tennessee, and Virginia. It is in the South where Goldwater has rung up his victory so far. He has won 25 electoral votes by winning Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Arkansas, Georgia, and Louisiana yet not recorded, not placed in either column. And there are no states, of course, recorded from the West yet, where the polls are, of course, still open. Let's find out now about these races for the state houses, for the governorships of our various states. 25 races up. Mike Wallace has been keeping tabs on all of them. Mike?
Walter, 25 races, and we have now 7 indicated winners. We told you about 2 of them before: Roger Brannigan in Indiana, Hayden Burns in Florida. Well, now first let's go to North Carolina. In North Carolina, there are early indications from our VPA models that even though they had no great reason to like him, Negro voters in the state are voting for Democrat Dan K. Moore, who leads Robert Gavin 140,000 to 113,000. He is the indicated winner there. His VPA total will seem to run up to about 55% over Gavin in the state of North Carolina. In the contest for governor in West Virginia, our VPA models indicate Democrat Hewlett Smith has won over Republican Cecil Underwood. Smith with 53,000 votes so far tabulated Underwood with 41,000 votes. And over on VPA, we see that Hewlett-Smith probably will wind up with around 58% of the popular vote in West Virginia. Cecil Underwood, 42%. Underwood was governor of West Virginia 4 years from 1957 to 61. He wanted to become the first two-term governor in West Virginia history. He has not made it, evidently. In the race for governor of Vermont, the indicated winner is Democrat Philip Hoff. He has 9,300 tabulated votes so far. Ralph Foote, his opponent, has 6,800 tabulated votes. According to VPA, Philip Hoff, who simply came across the border from Massachusetts 10 years ago to be a lawyer in Vermont, from Greenfield, Massachusetts, over into Vermont, will wind up with about 62% of the vote, Foote with 38%. There's an interesting note in Vermont, by the way. It's one of the ticket-splitting states today. One of the Phil Hoff has won, evidently, re-election. President Johnson has swept that state. He has even a higher percentage in Vermont than Phil Hoff has. But the incumbent Republican Senator, Winston Prouty, has turned back Mr. Fayette, his Democratic challenger. In Texas, John Connally is running well ahead of the president. According to our tabulated vote, John Connally has 2,422 votes. Jack Creighton, his opponent, 631. The Connally on BPA, Connally has or will wind up with about 69% of the vote to Jack Creighton's 31% of the vote. And I have one last note here in front of me that Warren Hearns is the winner in the race for governor in Missouri over Ethan Shepley. Our VPA estimate on his final vote, Hearns 60%, Shepley 40%. That's it in the state houses, Walter.
Mike, Lyndon Johnson continues to amass this amazing total of popular vote and electoral vote. Vote profile analysis now says that Lyndon Johnson is the indicated winner in Massachusetts with its 14 electoral votes. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election, will continue in just a moment. The basis of our national model, that is taking a cross-section of the nation and its voting habits in the past and taking a look at what's happening tonight, now looks to us as if Lyndon Johnson is going to win this election by a remarkable 63%, the highest percentage that any president has ever won an election by in this country, beating Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 61%, by which he defeated Alf Landon in 1936. That's what our national model would indicate at the moment. On the basis of our board, we have 12% of the vote tabulated. Some 10 million votes have been counted so far out of the more than 70 million expected. And Lyndon Johnson has 5,871,000 votes. Goldwater, 4,244,000. On the basis of these votes actually counted, this is not a projected figure, but on the basis of the votes actually counted, that gives Johnson 58% of the vote and Goldwater 42%. Of course, while the people vote, cast their ballots to determine how their electors will vote in the Electoral College, it is the Electoral College vote that counts. The president is elected by that means 270 votes it takes, and Johnson has 227 with a probable 49 for a total of 276. Let's go now to Paul Niven at the home of Raymond Lee in Lockport, New York.
The polls haven't closed yet, so I wouldn't say that the ball game was completely over as of this moment.
Well, Senator Goldwater said that Illinois was a rather crucial state for
Yes,
you.
yes.
And apparently, according to the projections right now, you're going to lose Illinois.
Well, according to projections, but the projection in Illinois is still close.
Congressman, do you see...
I wouldn't write Illinois off as far as we're concerned at this point.
Do you see any hope that the tide will be reversed as it goes further west?
Well, you can always hope, Paul, can't you?
Do you have any expectations of carrying New York?
This is Representative William Miller, vice presidential candidate on the Goldwater ticket.
10 more minutes, and once we get one of these very keen projections, well, we'll know a lot more about it.
It seems that you're not going to give up until you really are
No,
sure.
that's right.
In other words, you may go till 4 or 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time?
Well,
it
may well go that late.
You have a lot of coffee?
It may not, but then, don't worry, we'll take care of you.
How late do you expect to stay out?
Talked with Senator Goldwater lately.
Yes, I just talked to him about an hour ago.
What did he have to say?
Well, he said it looked a little rough in the beginning, but he didn't feel hopeless at all.
Did that walk do him some good?
I think so. I think so.
And your golf did you some good.
Yes, it did.
Congressman, how late do you expect to stay up?
Oh, I'm sure we'll be up till 2 or 3 o'clock.
And you, Mrs. Miller?
I hope I last that long. You know, that's a little later than I usually stay up. But I'll try.
You've been staying up pretty late in this campaign anyway.
Well, no, we usually turn in early during this campaign.
Well, sometimes...
Get up early, but to bed early.
You know, Mrs. Miller, I saw you when the campaign started.
For Louisiana and other states that we feel more or less certain will carry. So that...
Well, that was one of those rather interesting interviews. 2 interviews going on simultaneously, apparently, there at the home of some friends of William Miller up in upstate New York. Down in Washington, D.C., John Bailey, the national chairman of the Democratic Party, I understand, is about to say something.
Syball was beaten by Don Irwin. That was one of the seats that everybody was interested in. It's now a new Democratic seat. We know the election is not over. Polling places are still open in some areas across the country, but I'm confident of our good Democrats work in these states, and they are working, from the reports I get, just as hard as our workers worked in those states which have already reported, that we will carry these states too. We will win a great victory for Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey. I want to say at this time I'm most grateful for the work done by the Democratic Party today. Our Democratic organization did the job we set out for them to do. That is, to make sure we had the greatest vote that was ever cast in this country. We were sure that if we had that greatest vote, there could be no question of what the outcome would be. I hope that those people in the mountain states and in the far west will get out and vote. We'll vote for our candidates for the Senate, congressional seats, our candidates for governor, and we'll have a great victory.
That was John Bailey, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. We'll continue now with regional election coverage from our affiliated CBS television stations, and we'll be back with more national coverage from our CBS News election headquarters in a few minutes.
Tomorrow night, Lucille Ball visits Danny Kaye on the CBS television network. Campaign 64, Election Night, continues now. Brought to you by the Institute of Life Insurance, on behalf of the life insurance companies in America and their agents. And by Pell Mell, a cigarette for people who are particular about taste.
Hi, this is Walter Cronkite back at our CBS News election headquarters, where we're recording this amazing landslide for Lyndon Baines Johnson. He's the President of the United States. Our vote profile analysis indicates that Lyndon Johnson now has won Michigan, he has won New Hampshire, he has won in Kansas, taking that normally Republican state by a probable percentage of 55%. He is the probable winner in North Dakota. And now Barry Goldwater, according to VPA, has recorded his 4th southern state. At least he is in the probable winner category in Georgia. It is probable, according to VPA, that Goldwater will win Georgia by a percentage around 54%. And a senatorial race that the nation was watching, a place where the Republicans were making a strong bid, where George Bush in Texas was hoping to take away the Senate seat of the Democrat Ralph Yarborough. Apparently, Ralph Yarborough, according to VPA, has won in Texas by 57%. Surprisingly, carrying the state, according to VPA, by a larger percentage than did Lyndon Johnson for his home state. Lyndon Johnson's percentage in Texas being about 53%. With 15% of the popular vote counted, recorded so far, 7,406,000 votes for Johnson, 5,180,000 votes for Senator Barry Goldwater. That's 59% of the vote for Johnson and 41% for Goldwater. Johnson went over the top some time ago in our indications of won and probable electoral votes, not won totally. But if he holds on to those states where we say he is the probable winner, and having won in 259 electoral votes, probable 53, his total would be 312. And that is more than the 270 he needed for election. Senator Goldwater has won in 3 states, Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina, with a total of 25 electoral votes. He's a probable winner according to VPA in Georgia, and that would be a total of 37 electoral votes for him. But we can get the real details on all of these races now from our detail men in this area, Harry Reisner and Roger Mudd, and I assume they've got the call on Wisconsin.
Your details first.
In Michigan, President Johnson is indicated there to be the winner by 64%, showing the president to be running very strongly in Detroit and in the Oakland-Macomb County suburban area just to the north of Detroit. The call for Michigan is President Johnson 64%. If things look bad for Barry Goldwater tonight, at least he can take heart in what he's doing in Georgia. And in Georgia, the gateway to the south, the indications are that Senator Goldwater will be the probable winner in Georgia by 54%.
Tell him I can't get the mic.
The president is now the
Roger.
in Wisconsin, according to our vote profile analysis.
And Roger, I'm facing that electoral vote board, so I can tell you by moving those electoral votes in Wisconsin to the 1 column, according to a CBS vote profile analysis, Lyndon Baines Johnson has been elected President of the United States. His electoral vote has gone over the 270 figure by a single vote, 271. And the landslide has carried him in for his first term in office on his own right by his own election. There is the figure 271 electoral votes for Johnson. He has a probable 41 other electoral votes that bring him up to 312. You just saw the figures change on our board. Now back to you, Roger.
If it's all over for Barry Goldwater, at least this evening the senator knows that he did something no Republican has ever done before. At least according to vote profile analysis, this man from Arizona has carried the state of Georgia, which has never gone for a Republican nominee. According to our vote profile estimate, the senator is the probable winner in Georgia. With Atlanta yet to be heard from, President Johnson ran very poorly in the southern and eastern portions of Georgia, where apparently his civil rights stand has cut into his lead. Another southern state, we have indications now the president has won Tennessee. Vote profile analysis gives Tennessee to Lyndon Johnson 55%. That was a good race for a long time, but now the main area in Tennessee, the Nashville section, has come in, and the president's lead 271,428 to 219,020 for Senator Goldwater. Harry, have you got a good one from the east?
In New Hampshire, which is the state that Barry Goldwater has probably visited more than any other because of that primary campaign there last year. President Johnson is the winner by 59% of the vote. Senator Goldwater took a beating there in the primary and has not apparently picked up much strength since. BPA estimate shows that the 59% will hold, and that completes a sweep of that northeast quadrant for President Johnson.
You know, it was in New Hampshire, Harry, that the Social Security issue first got started against Barry Goldwater, and it got started not by the Democrats, but by Nelson Rockefeller, who was the main opponent for
Senator Goldwater claims that spurred him all along, a misinterpretation of his stand.
We've also got a call on Kansas, where vote profile analysis finally has come to a decision there, indicating that President Johnson will pull in about 55% of the vote in Kansas. That was a good fight right until a few minutes ago, when finally precincts came in from Wichita and the Western Plains. And in North Dakota, President Johnson is the probable winner there on the basis of vote profile analysis. Very few popular votes are in. You can see the dramatic comparison there. On the basis of EPA, he will ultimately get 58% of the popular votes when they're all counted.
Roger, stepping into your southern territory for just a minute, VPA now indicates that President Johnson is the winner in Florida, which I think has been with about 55% of the vote. He's ahead in the popular vote, 541,000. Now that's changing right now, 559,000 to 521,000. Our precincts indicate that when it's all over, he will have won by about 55%.
So, Walter, he's got, Goldwater has got Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi. The only other southern state to hear from is Louisiana, and that would be the extent of the southern victory.
Well, certainly we've got a lot to look forward to yet tonight, although we have indicated that Lyndon Johnson has won with the 270 electoral votes needed. We haven't heard from a lot of the western states yet. There are a lot of Senate races, gubernatorial races of particular importance out there, particularly in California, that Salinger-Murphy race for the Senate, and they haven't even closed the polls out there yet. A lot of Californians are still trooping to the polls, as they are in many of the western states. So there's a lot to be recorded yet this evening on this election night. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. Two calls from vote profile analysis. It indicates that Johnson has won North Dakota, and it indicates now that we should move Georgia out of the probable column and say that it is too close to call. While a moment ago, Georgia looked like it was probably a call for Senator Barry Goldwater, we're now saying that the issue is narrowing in Georgia, and it is too close to call. You see the popular vote at 34% is 162,000 for Goldwater and 144,000 for Johnson. And we ought to emphasize, I think, once more, we can't say it too often or too strongly, that while Lyndon Johnson is the winner of the presidency, a lot of polls are still open. A lot of local races are yet to be decided. The margin of the presidential victory is important to history and to the mandate he receives from the people, and the area of the country from which he receives it is important. The senatorial races, the gubernatorial races, state houses are important. You should still get out and vote. Only the presidential race has been decided, but the margin is still important. And whether you are Democratic and want to see it larger from your section of the country, or whether you're Republican and want to see it smaller, there's still a chance in many states, nearly half of our states still, to register your vote. And now, Bob Trout, can you tell us about the congressional races?
Walter, I have so many, I don't know how many I can tell you about. In the first place, 11 Democrats have been probably elected to the Senate so far tonight, only one Republican, and of those 11, we include the one in Texas, the liberal Democratic Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was supposed to be hard-pressed by the liberal the conservative Republican young Mr. Bush, but Senator Yarborough is winning in Texas by a percentage which exceeds President Johnson's winning vote in the state of Texas tonight, and indeed the vote of the late John F. Kennedy 4 years ago. Those 11 senators also include in Missouri Senator Stuart Symington, who is winning a third term by a percentage that is estimated by vote profile analysis as about 65%. Senator Symington ran against Paul Bradshaw, a Republican airline executive. In New Jersey, where there was a heavy turnout of voters and 47% of those votes have been counted, Democratic Senator Harrison Williams is way ahead. He's got 750,000 to the 420,000 of the Republican Bernard Shanley, who was the appointment secretary to President Eisenhower back in the White House days, and the VPA estimates that Senator Williams' winning percentage will be about 60% when it's all over. In Vermont, the Republican Senator Winston Prouty, who was heavily favored over Frederick Fayette in a rematch of their contest of 6 years ago, apparently has done it very easily. With 50% of the Vermont votes counted, Senator Prouty has 18,000 to 13,000 for the Democrat Mr. Fayette. And so, according to the BPA estimate, Senator Prouty will withstand by a winning margin of about 55% the Lyndon Johnson sweep of Republican Vermont. It's a slim margin for Senator Prouty, really. The rural revolt in Vermont against Senator Goldwater did not hit Senator Prouty, at least not very much. In Virginia, Senator Harry Byrd, the Democratic senator, goes into his 6th term very easily, even though only 17% of the votes have been tabulated. Senator Byrd's count so far is 49,000 to 13,000 for the Republican Richard May, who's the first Republican ever to try to oppose Senator Byrd since 1946. And Republicans were horrified that he might campaign too hard and so rouse Senator Byrd into coming out for President Johnson, which he didn't have to do as far as President Johnson's vote is concerned. Walter?
Thank you, Robert. Campaign 64. CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. And the state with the biggest block of electoral votes in this nation of ours, New York, has gone for Lyndon Baines Johnson. Vote profile analysis says he is the indicated winner in New York. We do not have a percentage of that win yet. Now we'll be watching to see in the Senate race in New York whether the Republican incumbent, Senator Kenneth Keating, or his challenger, Robert Kennedy, the former Attorney General and brother of the late president, will win that race in New York. But Lyndon Baines Johnson has carried New York. The percentage will be important. We'll be looking for it to come in shortly. Incidentally, I referred earlier to the fact that Lyndon Johnson's percentage in Texas seemed to be behind that of a couple of his running mates, the Governor Connolly and Senator Yarborough. Apparently the percentage of EPA is projecting now for Texas is 61% for Lyndon Johnson, and that puts him actually a little bit ahead of Senator Yarborough and still behind Governor John Connolly. At 61%, he is some 4 percentage points, I guess it is, ahead of Senator Yarborough, who's carried the state with 57%. Connolly carried it with about 69%. Eric Severide, we haven't had a chance to hear from you for a few minutes. How does it look now?
Well, Walter, the thing is so big and so simple, there are only so many things you can say about this kind of an election. This, of course, is our first Southern president elected on his own, unless you count Mr. Woodrow Wilson, who made his political career in the North. It's obviously been an unequal contest from the start, because our projected outcome here is about what the polls were saying it would be 2 and 3 months ago after the Republican convention. Not very much attitude around the country has been changed as far as we can see up to this point. The Republican defections away from Mr. Goldwater have been one of the remarkable things about this election. They run as high as 50% apparently in Vermont, which used to be a rock-rib Republican state, around 30% in the small towns of central Pennsylvania. This is one of the distinguishing characteristics of this. It hasn't been two parties in a sense running, it's been a party and a half. When the Goldwater nomination was driven through last July, and he took the attitude, he and his people, toward the moderates that he did, then one of the basic principles in the American political process was broken. That is the principle of compromise, which generally starts within each political party. And so we're going on with the old cycle. No party has taken the White House and kept it less than 8 years in this century, and this is what is simply continuing, I think, Walter.
Eric, Senator Ted Kennedy.
I'm sorry?
Senator Ted Kennedy, the young brother of the late president, who was running for re-election in Massachusetts, apparently has won as expected by a whopping 69% of the vote, according to the VPA projection in Massachusetts. And he'll be getting that word from his hospital bed, where he's still recovering from last fall's injuries in that automobile, or that airplane accident. And the District of Columbia, which voted for the first time since 1801 in a presidential election today, has gone as expected also for Lyndon Baines Johnson. With 18% of the electoral vote counted, we have 9,205,000 votes for Johnson, 6,310,000 votes for Barry Goldwater. And for the last hour, since about 9% of the vote was in, the percentage has remained the same on the popular vote count, 59% for Johnson and 41% for Goldwater, although our national model indicates that Johnson probably will end up with about 63% of the popular vote. Some time ago, we were able to say that on the basis of vote profile analysis, Lyndon Johnson had been elected President of the United States with 343 electoral votes. Now, to 12 in the probable states that are listed for him, for a total of 355 electoral votes. He passed the 270 needed for a clear majority about 15 minutes ago. Senator Goldwater has 25 electoral votes from Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina. He took an early lead in Georgia, and it looked like he might win that state. He may still, but at the moment, VPA says that is too close to call in Georgia. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. A moment ago, we declared, we said that Ted Kennedy had won his race for re-election in Massachusetts to the United States Senate, and now, from the state of New York, VPA says that we may say that Robert F. Kennedy is the probable winner of his Senate race in the state of New York. I'm sure Bob Trout can give us more details. Bob?
Well, I haven't seen a single figure on that race yet, Walter. It's a race, of course, that we've all been waiting for because it probably rivals the presidential race itself in interest. And while we've got none of the actual vote counted so far, this is the first VPA estimate of what is going to happen in that race. When all the votes are counted, Robert F. Kennedy, the former Attorney General, the 38-year-old candidate, will have about 52% of the vote, we think, and Senator Keating, Republican Senator Kenneth Keating, will probably end with about 45% of the vote. Senator Keating trying for his second term. He was a representative in the House of Representatives for 12 years, that is 6 terms. He didn't really want to run for the Senate the first time when he was talked into it 6 years ago by the Republican organization, but he did consent to do so, and he won his first term. He's trying for a second term, and apparently he will end up with 45% of the vote in New York. Senator Robert Kennedy with 52% and 3% for the Conservative Party candidate. That's a local candidate in this part of the country for Mr. Paolucci. Walter, does that explain anything? I hope so.
It explains a great deal, Bob. I also noticed here that the Conservative Party candidate in New York, that the Goldwater conservatives had entered against Senator Keating, who would never at any time during his campaign come out with an endorsement of the Goldwater ticket. So the conservatives entered a candidate against him, and they built up a 3% vote in our VPA model, which would indicate that even if there had not been this split in the Republican ranks, Senator Keating could not have overcome the whopping lead that Lyndon Johnson built up in New York and helped carry Bobby Kennedy in with him. Since the Keating margin was 45%, the conservative margin 3%, the total there obviously is 48. Kennedy won with apparently probable 52% in New York. We'll continue now with regional election coverage from our affiliated CBS television stations, and we'll be back with more national coverage from our CBS News election headquarters in a few minutes. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, this is Walter Cronkite, and our VPA, our vote profile analysis, says that Lyndon Johnson will win in California. In the popular vote, 45% of the vote is in, 21,500,000 for Johnson, 14 million for Goldwater. That's nationally. Statewide in California, 10% of the vote in. Johnson jumped to an early lead in the popular vote, 406,000 to 259 for Goldwater. And as we say, VPA says Johnson will win that state. In the other interesting race in California for the Senate seat, there Senator Pierre Salinger is trailing George Murphy, the Republican, a former movie actor and dancer, 229,000 to 249,000, with 7% of that race counted. Far too early for any vote profile analysis call on the senatorial race in California, which is very close. We now have a probable for Idaho. Idaho probably will go to Lyndon Baines Johnson. And in the Washington Senate race, Senator Scoop Jackson has been returned to the Senate from Washington as expected. He's the Democrat by a margin of about 69%. Now let's go to our presidential desk for some more details. Gentlemen?
Walter, we've been watching the vote come in California with a great deal of interest. Certainly when Dean Birch said that this election tonight was going to be decided west of the Mississippi, he meant in places like California, which Richard Nixon took by an eyelash in 1960. I guess you'd call 0.3 of a percentage point an eyelash. And but this year, President Johnson is running about 10 points better than John Kennedy did in California. And admittedly, in that popular vote, which shows Mr. Johnson with 406,000 to Senator Goldwater's 259,000, probably that is not quite representative yet of Senator Goldwater's strength in Los Angeles and Orange County and in San Diego. However, as the VPA precincts come in from those areas, the strength that he might have had there just is not materializing. Roger?
If I can break in just momentarily, after rocking back and forth all evening, we now have a probable winner in Georgia on the basis of vote profile, and that's Barry Goldwater. 73% of the popular vote in, Goldwater ahead 415,158 to Johnson's 361,292, but VPA gives Goldwater 52%. And apparently Goldwater's victory was hewn out of South and East Georgia, and despite a massive outpouring by Negro voters for the president. I'm sorry I broke in on you.
That's all right. That's the one we've been waiting for.
That's right. That would, let's see, what would that do to the South now, Harry?
Give him his fifth. It would give him his fifth southern state and wind up the South, wouldn't it?
Well, Georgia, Arkansas is still out. Not a definite call on Arkansas, but it would give Goldwater then Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi.
You've got a probable winner in Arkansas. But
well, you don't check it yet.
Well, getting back briefly to California, where President Johnson has made his points there is by greatly increasing the normal Democratic success in the Northern California area. In the East Bay, Sacramento, San Francisco, and in the North Country above that, he's running well over 60%. Much better than John Kennedy did, and enough to assure him of victory no matter what happens in the remaining portions of Los Angeles. He's getting, as he has in a great many states, he's getting a larger percentage of the Catholic vote than Mr. Kennedy got. And he's a full 10 points over President Kennedy in the Protestant vote. Bob Trout, is there any indication of whether Pierre Salinger is sharing in President Johnson's victory there?
Well, Harry, Republican George Murphy is ahead of Senator Pierre Salinger in the number of votes counted, but not enough of them have been counted to mean anything, especially in that huge state. 1/4 of our VPA's precincts, the precincts on which the VPA estimates are based, are now in, but it's still too close to estimate for VPA to have a go at it. During the campaign, there was some talk there of a President Johnson backlash in California. So many Californians planning to vote for President Johnson, it was said that many of them would then vote for the Republican George Murphy for the Senate, just to prove that they were independent, Harry.
Walter?
We might take a look at our presidential summary boards again. The states where Johnson has put together this landslide victory, he has won every state in the East, all of them without exception: Connecticut, Delaware, District of Columbia, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont. In the Middle West, he has won all of them or is about to win them all. The only outstanding ones in the Middle West are the probable Nebraska and South Dakota, but otherwise Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, North Dakota, Ohio, West Virginia, Wisconsin, all in the Johnson column, none for Goldwater in the Middle West. And in the South, that is the area where Goldwater has rung up his only victories in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina, with Georgia as a probable. But Johnson has won Florida, Kentucky, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia, and is the probable winner in Arkansas. And in the West, the story apparently is going exactly the same way. Out there, California, Colorado, Montana, Nevada, New Hampshire, Oregon, Utah, Washington, Wyoming are all in his column, and only Alaska, Arizona, Hawaii, and Idaho are still outstanding. And we had a probable call in Idaho just a moment ago. It has not been moved over on the board, but Idaho is a probable as well. So in the undecided column, with no calls at all, there are only 3 states left. Our 49th and 50th states, Hawaii and Alaska, which will come in very late, and Arizona, where the race is still exceedingly close, although the gubernatorial race there has been won by a Democrat, Sam Goddard, wresting the House, the State House from the Republicans in Arizona. Wresting, as a matter of fact, from Richard Kleindienst, a close friend and associate of Senator Goldwater. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. Out to Phoenix, Arizona, to Robert Pierpoint. Bob?
The headquarters of a losing candidate is never a very happy place, and this looks like that kind of headquarters. Actually, the Camelback Inn here outside Phoenix is a beautiful spot for a victory celebration. There are lots of people here. There are plenty of drinks for everyone. There are not very many people drinking, however, yet, and there are lots of pretty girls around. It's a beautiful night. Everything is perfect for a victory celebration, but I don't think there's going to be one here tonight. Many of these people are close friends of Senator Goldwater's. Others are staff workers who've been working very hard for the senator for many months now. And of course, they're still hoping against hope, but most of them, like the senator himself, are realists, and they are afraid that tonight they're going to see the senator defeated. Senator Goldwater, we have been told, is preparing to come down here to the Camelback Inn when the national vote reaches 60% and when the California vote is mostly in. That sounds like it may be a concession. Congressman John Rhodes, who has spent the evening with the senator, says that he is relaxed and talking about his future, but he does not say what that future will be. This is CBS News correspondent Robert Pierpoint at the Goldwater headquarters in Arizona.
There's something poignant about these last hours of any election night. Some of the highest drama of the evening, of course, is even after the races have been won or lost, when we do hear from the winning candidate and the defeated one. We'll be watching for those statements from Austin and from Phoenix, Arizona, a little later on this evening. Certain poignancy, as a matter of fact, to Senator Goldwater's statement. It seems poignant now, at any rate, looking back on it, as he left the airport in Arizona last night for home, the last public statement of the campaign. He said, "I don't know where you could uproot another vote right now. It's getting kind of late." Bob Trout, perhaps you can tell us something about the congressional races. I haven't heard from you for a little while.
Walter, I've just been looking over at the boards where we keep our scores for the House of Representatives and looking at the section for the South. And the Republicans in the South so far seem to be picking up a minimum of 2 seats. They had, and if we could look at the boards for the South, they had in the last House of Representatives in the Congress that's just ending, Republicans had 14 seats, and now they seem to be electing 16. In Alabama, as we can see, the leading or elected, the Democrats have 3, the Republicans 5, and that's a loss for the Democrats and a gain, a startling gain for the Republicans. Of course, this is not absolutely definite yet. It only seems probable. The next state is Arkansas, and there is no change to report. In Florida, which has 12 seats, again, the Democrats seem to be ending with 10, the Republicans with 2. It's in Alabama that the Republicans made their big gain. In Georgia, no Republican representatives elected so far, 10 Democrats, as we can see. Kentucky, Republicans are picking up 1, it looks, as if they are at least, and the Democrats losing 1. It should be 5-2 in the next Congress if the present trend holds. 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. In Louisiana, despite the fact that the state seems to be going for Senator Goldwater, the Republicans are not electing any representatives, and there will be 8 Democratic representatives in the next Congress in Louisiana. Mississippi, the Republicans seem actually to be losing 1. They had 1, and now it looks as if there will be 5 Democratic representatives from Mississippi in the next Congress. North Carolina, where it was 10-1 in favor of the Democrats, it should be 9-2 in the next Congress. Again, these are not definite yet. These are probables and leadings. In Oklahoma, which has 6 seats, 5-1 is the same measurement. It is the measurement of the old Congress and should be for the new one. South Carolina, well, actually, they seem to be losing a seat. They have 6 Democratic seats in the last Congress, and they have 5 Democrats presently who have won, no Republicans. Tennessee, as you can see, Democrats 5-4. The new Congress, it will be Democrats 6-3. They're picking up 1 there if it goes on this way. In Texas, the Republicans are coming up with 2. The Democrats who'd had 23 are going down to 21 at the moment. In Virginia, the Democrats 9-1 in the old Congress, 8-2 in the new one. And this is the summary for the states of the South. 103 Democrats leading or elected, 16 Republicans leading or elected. In the old Congress, it was 104-14. There's a discrepancy in the figures, but that's because some are listed as leading and some are listed as definitely elected. But the Republicans do seem to be picking up some. It's been an interesting story. I could just give it to you very briefly in one sentence, I believe. The Republican gains in the House of Representatives were made in the South in 1952 and 1954 and 1962. They didn't make a single gain in 56, 58, and 60. Suddenly in 1962, Walter, 2 years ago, the Republicans gained 5 more seats. Now they're gaining more tonight again.
Well, we're going to take a look at some of the states where the vote has been split, the notable Senate and gubernatorial races against the presidential race, and we're going to do that when we return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results. That's in just a moment. On our tabulated vote, we've just passed the halfway mark. 51% of the vote has been counted, and Johnson has 24 million to 15,600,000 for Goldwater. His percentage, 61% to 31% for Goldwater. And on the electoral vote, the one that counts, as we've said so many times, Johnson 3 hours ago almost passed the magic 270 figure and continues to build up his lead. It's now 460 electoral votes he's won. He's probably won 15 more for a total of 475. Goldwater has won 35, and Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina has probably won the 12 electoral votes from Georgia for a total of 47. And we just heard from Phoenix, Arizona, that Senator Goldwater, through his press aide, has said he intends to wait until 60% of the vote is in before he makes any sort of a statement. Well, with the rapidity with which our network election service is bringing in this tabulated vote tonight, that won't be a great deal longer, I should not expect. So we may be hearing from Senator Goldwater in the next 15 minutes to half hour. A very interesting facet of tonight's election has been the split ticket in many states. Many people voting for Johnson for the presidency, but for a Republican in Senate or gubernatorial races, or vice versa. Now let's take a quick look at some of those. In New York State, for instance, Lyndon Johnson won New York State, according all these figures according to VPA, by 69%, 2 million to 1 million there. And Senator Kennedy, he will be Senator Kennedy elect, won by 54% of the vote. So he definitely rode Lyndon Johnson's coattails to that victory in New York. In Pennsylvania, Lyndon Johnson has won the state by 65%, and in the words that the Republicans might use, he threatens to pull in Miss Genevieve Blatt in the senatorial race, because with that great big margin, she is running very close to Senator Hugh Scott. As you see, their popular vote is almost even, and our VPA estimate says it's too close to call, 50% for each at the moment. In Ohio, Lyndon Johnson won by 62%, and by the same token as in Pennsylvania, he may be pulling the incumbent Senator Stephen Young along with him. 63% I see on our board there now, but Stephen Young is running behind in popular vote by just a few thousand comparatively, and yet the VPA says that this race is far too close to call, like the one in Pennsylvania, around 50%. But Young obviously is holding up there thanks to Lyndon Johnson's long lead of 62% or 63% in the state. In Michigan, a similar story where Lyndon Johnson won the state by 67%, a whopping lead in Michigan. And there, the story is somewhat reversed. Despite Johnson's big win in Michigan, Neil Stabler, the Democratic candidate for governor, could not quite overcome the great popularity of Governor George Romney, the Republican incumbent, and Romney is winning there by a hefty margin according to our vote profile analysis percentages. That may make George Romney one of the leading Republicans, as Eric Sevareid has suggested a little bit earlier. In Illinois, Lyndon Johnson has won by 60%, and he carried in Otto Kerner, the incumbent governor, defeating the bid of Republican Chuck Percy, 60% for Johnson, 53% for Kerner. In Texas, Lyndon Johnson won by 64%, and Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was feared might face defeat by the Republican challenger George Bush, was brought in with a 57% margin. In the Johnson race in California, he's won by 59%, and the Salinger-Murphy race in the Senate is still too close to call. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. Now let's go to Mike Wallace over at the gubernatorial desk. Mike?
Walter, there were 25 contests for governor. 25 tonight. 20 of them, according to VPA, are now decided. 17 Democrats are in, and 3 Republicans. Let's start, first of all, if we can, this time around with the governor of Arkansas. Our VPA, our tabulated vote shows that Orville Faubus is the winner. He's leading 43,000 to 22,000, 23,000 over Winthrop Rockefeller. But VPA shows him at 62%, eventually to Rockefeller's 38%, and that is about 11% down from the last time around for Orville Faubus, but he does evidently win his 6th straight term. In the race for governor in Utah, Democrat Calvin Rampton holds a slender lead in the tabulated vote, 18,000 to 16,000, but our VPA analysis indicates him the winner over Republican Mitchell Melich, 58% to 42%. That's one state in which the Republican, who was George Clyde, the Republican governor, retired, and so the Democrats take the state away from the Republicans there. There's one other state in which that has happened. Paul Fannin, the governor of Arizona, resigned to run for the Senate against Roy Elson out there. And, of course, Sam Goddard beat Richard Kleindienst. In South Dakota, Republican Lieutenant Governor Niels Bowe is the indicated winner over Democrat John Lindley, though the tabulated vote hardly shows it. VPA analysis indicates about 55% for Bowe. He is the 3rd Republican, evidently, to be elected. That's all that we have from the gubernatorial desk for the time being, Walter.
We've got a report that the gubernatorial race in Wisconsin is too close to call, Mike. Maybe you reported that, the race between Reynolds and Knowles. I don't know. I had got disturbed. But it is too close to call. We'll continue now with regional election coverage from our affiliated CBS television stations, and we'll be back with more national coverage from our CBS News election headquarters in a few minutes. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, we're going right down to Austin, Texas, and President Johnson.
There to work on a Democratic program for all the people in the days to come.
Did you have any disappointments? Have you seen any disappointments in the results tonight?
Yes.
Where?
Well, I don't want to go into that, but we want to wait until they finalize. We are hopeful that some of the candidates that are behind at the moment will come through in the House and the Senate.
You took some polls while the campaign was on. Is this the results following some of the ideas you had?
I would say as of now that the indications that we receive from the television reports are almost on the nose of all the polls that we have.
Mr. President, Walter Cronkite is in New York. You want to say hello to him, would you please?
Hello, Mr. President.
Hello, Walter. We are all thinking of you down here in Austin and wish you were back in your hometown.
Well, thank you very much, sir. When I saw you going up to the Governor Connolly's mansion there, I was wishing I could be down there. And you got some rain for your ranch today, too, didn't you?
Yes, and you're part of this state, so hurry back.
Well, thank you very much, sir. You've certainly racked up an immense majority here tonight, the heaviest, undoubtedly, since President Roosevelt defeated Alf Landon in 1936, and it looks like it may go to a record majority. It must give you a great deal of satisfaction, sir.
Well, we'll have to see, Walter. I'm good to hear you.
Thank you, sir. President Lyndon Johnson at Austin, Texas, where he's been receiving this report of a landslide victory tonight. A victory that 58% of the vote totaled has given him 28 million votes to Barry Goldwater's 17 million votes, a margin of 61% in the popular vote counted. And earlier tonight, our vote profile analysis samples of the states in so far, giving him 468 electoral votes and probably 11 others for 479, indicated that this could very well exceed the 61% of the popular vote record that President Roosevelt did build up in 1936 against Alf Landon. And incidentally, it will make President Johnson only the second Democrat since the Civil War to win by a clear majority. Others have won by a plurality, that is more votes than their top running opposition, but not a clear majority, that is over 50% of the vote. This record total for President Johnson has been built up by huge majorities in such states as New York, the state with the largest electoral vote. And in popular vote, Lyndon Johnson, with 77% of the vote counted in New York, has 3.5 million votes to Senator Barry Goldwater's 1,678,000 votes. On our VPA percentages, we gave New York to Lyndon Johnson, by our calculations some time ago, 69%. We figure will be his final margin of victory in New York against the Goldwater's probable 31%. In the big Senate race in New York, which was watched with almost as much interest as the the presidential race, there's Robert Kennedy, the former Attorney General and brother of the late president, won over the incumbent Senator Kenneth Keating in a race that was watched so closely because Keating would not endorse the Goldwater-Miller ticket. Kennedy will win in the final analysis, we believe, by a percentage of 54 to 43 for Keating. Paolucci is a conservative candidate who, as you see, ran up a total of about 3% of the vote here. Not enough to have given Keating victory, even if the normally Republican vote had not been split by that margin. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election, will continue in just a moment.
What a way to start a day.
We gave you a picture a moment ago of New York State, the other big state, of course, the second largest state in electoral count, and probably the largest after the next census, in the next presidential race, but right now the second, California. Some time ago, we were able to say that California has gone for Lyndon Johnson 59%, 1,321,000 of the votes tabulated, with 1/3 of the vote in for Johnson, 920,000 for Goldwater. But our vote profile analysis percentage gives the state to Johnson by what we figure will be a margin of around 59%. In the Senate race there, however, it is far too close to call. With 18% of the senatorial vote counted in California, Salinger has 683,000 votes. That's the incumbent Senator Pierre Salinger, former White House News Secretary. George Murphy, the former movie actor, has 786,000. And we're saying it's far too close to call. This is George Romney, governor of Michigan, at his election headquarters in Detroit. Let's go out there.
Hey, Dave, go ahead now.
Lenore and I and Helen and Bill are simply overjoyed. But we're also humbled. This is a tremendous outpouring of citizen support for Michigan's unequaled record of progress under Republican leadership of state government. We owe so much to so many people that our hearts are just overjoyed, and we thank all of you and all the others who've made this possible. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And we all thank the thousands of members and workers in the Republican Party and thousands of others who have worked untiringly in this campaign. We also thank those Democrats and members of neither party who have, thank you, and I know there are many of you here tonight, and we welcome you, and members of neither party who have exercised their independent judgment
and entrusted us with the responsibility of leadership once again. We're grateful to Ellie Peterson, and Allison Green, and Meyer Warshawski, and all the other Michigan Republican candidates for state, national, and local office who have in their ways contributed so effectively to our campaign. And I also want to thank Art Elliott and Ruth Hobbs and John Martin and Ella Cousy and Tom Hart and John Stalen and others, Bill, who worked in your campaign, and people throughout the state, too numerous to mention here tonight. But we're in a position in Michigan to build on the progress which has been made in the past 2 years. We've adopted a new constitution. We've established fiscal integrity and have greatly stimulated economic growth. We have a solid basis for achieving full civil rights for all citizens. We have encouraged and expanded citizen participation in their state and local governments, private enterprise, and individual responsibility and voluntary cooperation in the neighborhood, the community, the state. We've made record strides in partially overcoming deficiencies in education, mental health, youth, and many other human needs, and established a solid foundation for meeting these needs more adequately in the future. Michigan is in a position to continue its great progress, but this may not be an easy road. It will.
Governor George Romney, whose victory for re-election in Michigan looms particularly large, something salvaged out of the Republican debacle of 1964 for the Republicans and a possible candidate for them for 1968. Robert Kennedy once said that George Romney was the Republican who his brother, the late president, feared the most. And his victory in Michigan is even the more remarkable and going to be remarked upon by Republicans in months to come because he managed to work out a 55% margin on our VPA estimate, 1,107,000 votes to 951 in the popular vote so far, but a 55% margin on VPA, despite the fact that Lyndon Johnson, according to VPA, carried the state 64%, and the Senator Philip A. Hart, the Democratic incumbent, won his race by 63%. So Romney winning for the Republicans, the State House in Michigan again with 55%, that will loom as quite a feat in this year. Let's go now to our presidential desk. Gentlemen, how looks it?
Walter, it looks like we can just about wrap the South up, at least for the purposes of VPA. We have another call on Arkansas, which is the next to the last state waiting to get a final decision. Georgia is still holding out. But in Arkansas, with President Johnson leading in the popular vote, 45,202 to Goldwater's 33,371, vote profile analysis indicates that President Johnson is the winner there, 56% of the vote. Apparently the president's victory in Arkansas was built up in a large degree on some surprising majorities in Fort Smith and in the northwest quadrant of the state in the Ozark area, which is traditionally Republican, and where he ran about 13 points ahead of John Kennedy 4 years ago. He ran behind John Kennedy, however, in Little Rock. One other state that we can call in the Midwest is South Dakota, where President Johnson is leading 26,334 to 20,003 for Senator Goldwater, but VPA indicates that President Johnson is the winner there, 53% of the total vote. In South Dakota, Sioux Falls, which accounts for about 75% of the vote, has gone for President Johnson. However, Goldwater hung on to a majority among the wheat farmers. President Johnson got about 64% of the Catholic vote, which is up 10 points from the lead John Kennedy had among Catholics, Harry.
In Idaho, Roger, where as things have gone tonight, Idaho is what you'd call almost a squeaker with 33% of the vote in. President Johnson is ahead in the tabulated vote 45,600 to 44,700. Our survey of precincts, our VPA estimate, indicates that the president will win by about 52% to 48%. But as we say, the way things have gone tonight, that's a real close race. We were taking a look back at some of our information about how the vote has gone tonight. It's quite clear that President Johnson has done very well with almost everybody, but in particular, he's done very well in the suburban areas that used to be considered Republican strongholds. To go with that, he's done well among the workers. The thought that some of these workers might be concerned about the Negro Revolution proceeding too fast and their jobs being in danger has not materialized. Except in the South, he's done well among the farmers. Farmers out in the Middle West are apparently worried about what might happen to a system that, while there are many things wrong with it from their standpoint, has grown up over the years, and they wouldn't know quite what to do without it if it were dropped immediately. Of course, he's gotten, in most places, 95% of the Negro votes. Protestants, some Protestants who are apparently worried about John Kennedy's Catholicism, have not been worried this time and have gone for him. I think the most instructive figures that you can show is just taking a look at a few eastern states, comparing what President Johnson has done, according to our estimates, with what President Kennedy did. 15% better in Connecticut, 10% better in Delaware, 23% better in Maine, 15% better in Massachusetts, John Kennedy's home state, 15% better in New Hampshire, 17% better in New Jersey, 24% better in Vermont, with a 24% change being enough to bring Vermont into the Democratic column for the first time. It's probable that this is a situation campaign and a situation victory. If he does exceed Franklin Roosevelt's landslide of 1936, as seems likely, it's more like the landslide of 1920 when Warren Harding got almost as much as Roosevelt did, rather than it isn't a personal tribute to Johnson so much as it is that everything was going for him this year.
Would it be your estimate that any Democratic nominee against Barry Goldwater would have done quite this well?
I don't think you can say that, because I think part of the situation is the picture, as Eric was mentioning the other day, the picture of this man who has had 1 year after a tragedy and deserves a chance. I think there's a tremendous sympathy for a man like that. But obviously, a lot of these are votes against Senator Goldwater. Walter?
Gentlemen, you know, something that strikes me always in these landslide situations, and this certainly is one, as you were just saying, Harry, this year, is still the fact that now with 62% of the vote counted, and incidentally, Senator Goldwater indicated he'd come out and make a statement in Phoenix at 60% of the vote, so we may be expecting him shortly out there, I suppose. With 62% of the vote counted, there's still 18 million people who voted for Senator Goldwater. It's not a total repudiation, certainly. There's a rather strong bulwark of strength for the Goldwater cause. Whether they're voting for the man or the cause, they voted 18 million of them so far, and that's with 60% of the vote in. That's going to get up to several more million. And incidentally, Denison Kitchell, who was, the campaign manager for Goldwater and getting the nomination and in the National Committee, has just said that it doesn't look like we're going to win this first round. We'll have to wait for 4 years, but we're going to get this government back where it belongs. So Denison Kitchell isn't giving up. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. In the California senatorial race, with 29% of the vote counted out there, George Murphy is holding on to his narrow lead over Senator Pierre Salinger. Murphy, the Republican, 1,120,000, Salinger 976,000, and even our vote profile analysis precincts say that race is too close to call in California. Now let's go to our analysis desk with Pierre Severide and Pierre Agronsky. Gentlemen?
Walter, one of the big elements in this Johnson victory, of course, is the unprecedented Negro vote in size and in cohesion. Our friend Teddy White, I think, wrote some weeks ago that for the leader of a party to deliberately turn the party's back on the Negro vote at this time in our history would have to be an act either of absolute folly or absolute calculation. I take it was what Mr. Goldwater said, an act of absolute calculation. But how about the results of it? Martin Negronsky has been looking at this picture. Martin, this is quite a block vote. What does the pattern look like now?
Well, it's an extraordinary pattern. I think this historic shift in Negro voting from the party of Lincoln to the party of the Democrats has brought I think the nearest thing that you can have to a unanimous vote of a community in any free country. See it here in Harlem, where 90% of the vote went for the Democrats. You see it all through the South in every one of the 11 states of the Confederacy. You see it in Negro voting up in registration by 43% from 1960. You see it in states like Virginia, where it is very clear that the Negro vote had a lot to do with taking Virginia out of the Republican column, where it's been for 4 presidential elections, into the Democratic column. You see it in Texas, where Senator Yarborough won re-election by a sort of combination of the Negro and Mexican vote, and again on the civil rights issue. Wherever you look, you see this unanimous pattern of Negro voting.
We've never had a real solid block vote quite like this in our history, have we?
Never in history, Eric. I can think of no group in this country that's ever voted in this fashion so consistently and so unanimously, all across the country. And there's a fundamental irony in it, too, really, when you think that it was the Republican Party which, through Lincoln, emancipated the Negro.
It was a sectional party that's beginning, a northern section. Now it's turned around as far as these majorities go. Thank you very much.
There's another facet of it, too, Eric, and that is that in the South, it means that any Democrat who intends to run as a liberal will have to woo the Negro vote in order to win. I think that is another result of this situation.
Thank you very much, Mark. Back to Walter today.
Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. That's a close race for the Senate in Pennsylvania. We'll continue now with regional election coverage from our affiliated CBS television stations, and we'll be back with more national coverage from our CBS News election headquarters in a few minutes.
See a post-election political analysis tomorrow night. CBS News coverage of Election Night continues. Brought to you by the Institute of Life Insurance, on behalf of the life insurance companies in America and their agents, and by Tarleton, the charcoal filter cigarette with a taste worth fighting for.
This is Walter Cronkite back at our CBS News election headquarters. On this election night, November 3rd, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson apparently has made history. It seems quite clear now that he has won the presidency in his own right by the largest majority ever run up by any presidential candidate in our history. It may run as high as 64%, according to our poll of precincts across the nation right now, with 31 million votes for Johnson and 19 million for Goldwater, with 70% of the vote tabulated. Johnson and Humphrey have 62% of the vote, and Goldwater and Miller 38%. 61% that Franklin Delano Roosevelt got against Alf Landon in 1936 was the highest previous total. Johnson's electoral vote is almost as wide a margin, too. 474 votes he's won already. He probably has won 5, and that's a total of 479. Goldwater has won 35. He probably will win 12 more in Georgia, and that will make a total of 47. 270 are required to win. The Democratic sweep for Lyndon Johnson that has cut across all economic, geographic, racial lines to give him victories in all groups in the country, is also carrying Democrats to victory in senatorial and gubernatorial races, and in the race for Congress. With 35 Senate seats up this year, the Democrats have won 26 and the Republicans only 3. That's 29 of the races, with 6 yet to be heard from. 26 Democratic seats with 40 holdovers would give them a margin of 66 votes in the 89th Congress, a meeting in January. The Republicans with 25 holdovers would have 28 seats. As we say, there are 6 seats yet to be heard from. In the state house races, there were 25 governorship races this year. The Democrats already have won 17 and the Republicans 4. With 16 holdovers, that means that Democrats will control the capitals of 33 states, the Republicans 13 states. A tremendous margin, a big new margin for the Democrats there. In the Congress of the United States, the Democrats have won 277 seats already, and the Republicans 132. It means that the Democratic margin definitely will be at least 23 seats more than they had in the 88th Congress. 254 they had then, 176 to the Republicans. So it looks as if the Democrats are going to have wide margins in both the houses of Congress as well as in the state capitals, which are very important in a year when many states are going to be reapportioning. By the same token, the Democrats are winning the state legislatures in many states where they had been held by the Republicans, in Indiana, for instance, and in New York State. There are still some close races outstanding, not very many. Our President Johnson swept the entire East. Goldwater got no states in the East. He swept the Middle West, and only Nebraska is outstanding there. It's probably for Johnson. In the West, Johnson has won everything except Alaska, Hawaii, and Arizona. Arizona is one of the races being watched very closely. It's still too close to call in Senator Goldwater's home state. Only in the South did Senator Goldwater win any states at all. Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina, and Georgia is still a probable and very close in Georgia. Among the close races we are watching is the gubernatorial race in Wisconsin also, where the Democratic governor, John Reynolds, is meeting a very close and tight, hard fight with Warren Knowles, his Republican challenger. And there are 5 outstanding Senate races that are really thrilling and going down to the wire. Bob Trout has a story there.
Yes, Walter, of all the stories there are to tell about the Senate and the House tonight, this is one of them. Of the 34 Senate races in the continental United States, 5 do remain too close to call at this time. In California, the Democratic Senator Pierre Salinger is trailing the Republican George Murphy by a handful of votes, as we can see, 35% of the vote counted. Let's just see what the VPA says. Vote profile analysis says 50-50. That means it's too close to call. In Ohio, Republican Robert Taft Jr. is leading the Democratic incumbent Stephen Young, but it still is not very much of a margin. Stephen Young has so far had marvelously good luck in his career. He swept into the Senate 6 years ago when the Republicans backed a right-to-work law that was their undoing in that election. And then this year in the Democratic primary, Senator Young was threatened by astronaut John Glenn, who suffered that bathroom fall and withdrew from the race. Will Senator Young's luck hold? We'll see a bit later on. In Arizona, Paul Fannin, the Republican, is leading Democrat Roy Elson for the seat that Senator Goldwater has vacated to make this presidential race. In Pennsylvania, Republican Senator Hugh Scott leads the Democrat Miss Genevieve Blatt, again by so few votes you can scarcely count them, just a handful. In Nevada, the incumbent Democratic Senator Howard Cannon leads the Republican Paul Laxalt by just a few votes again, 70% of the votes counted. That's the story of those 5 races, Walter.
So it looks like from your vantage point at the finish line, Bob, you're going to be cheering them on for a good while yet before we get final results on those. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment.
Honey?
Mike Wallace, we got Bob Trout's rundown of the senatorial races. Would you give us yours now on the State House, the gubernatorial races?
Well, Walter, finally out on the West Coast, a Republican candidate has unseated a Democratic governor in Washington State. The tabulated vote shows the Republican, 38-year-old Dan Evans, leading the Democratic incumbent Albert Rossellini, and that is just about the way that our VPA analysis of the race indicates it. Evans has won with an estimated 53% of the vote, although President Johnson won out there with about 58% of the vote, so there was a good deal of ticket splitting. Dan Evans, by the way, is by no means a Goldwater man. The way he put it was this: we are not repudiating our national candidates, but we are taking a different direction. That is the first Republican to unseat a Democratic incumbent in a state house any place in the United States tonight. Now, we haven't heard anything really of that tight gubernatorial contest in Massachusetts, the chief reason being that because of the, we're going to Senator Keating remote, I understand. Senator Kenneth Keating is evidently coming out of his headquarters from New York. I gather he's going to make a statement of concession here to Robert Kennedy. Kenneth Keating waged a tough and a bitter campaign, and the smile on his face, I'm sure, belies the feelings that he is saddled with right now. Nelson Rockefeller on his left, Jacob Javits on his right. It's been a disastrous evening for the Republican Party in all of New York. There's Charles Kuralt, CBS News correspondent at Keating headquarters.
Win in the state of New York as triumph for Republican moderation. On the other side by Herbert Brownell, his campaign director, apparently ready now to concede that he has lost this very hard-fought Senate contest to the younger brother of the late president.
Thank you very much. I have just dispatched the following telegram to Bob Kennedy. Dear Bob, congratulations on your victory. The people of New York have expressed their judgment, and I stand ready to assist you in every way in assuming your important post. I wish you every success in carrying out your senatorial duties. Signed, Ken Keating. I appreciate more than I can say the wonderful support which all of you hard workers have given to me. Some of you, most of you are Republicans. Many of you are Democrats and independents. I appreciate it more than I'm able to express. I want to also express my gratitude to the hundreds of thousands who voted for me in this election, and also to the more than majority, at least, who voted for me in 1958 and made it possible for me to have these 6 rewarding years in the United States Senate. I hardly know where to start in thanking my friends. I shall spend the next 2 or 3 days at least before I take a little rest. I shall spend in trying to contact and send letters to as many as possible of those who have been so wonderful in this campaign. It was a hard-fought campaign, and I see so many faces in this room of those who have been loyal supporters. I'm very grateful to you. I have at my side here Governor Rockefeller and Senator Javits. And my wonderful campaign director who gave so unstintingly of his time and his efforts and left his busy law practice in order to act in that capacity and really ran a tight ship and did a great job, and I'm extremely grateful to Herb Brownell. At my right, of course, is my old and dear friend who tramped many of the pavements with me here in the city, Louis Lefkowitz. And John Lamenzo, who spent all of yesterday with me campaigning and has been in the forefront of this fight. And my dear friend, the Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Wilson, who has done a great job. Gene Rositas, my campaign manager who worked with Herb Donnell. And the biggest man in the police force weighs 320 pounds, all muscle, that's been protecting me all the way through. So, Governor, why don't you say a word or two while we're all here?
Ken Keating and fellow Republicans. One of the great senators in the history of New York State has been rolled under, has been rolled under by a national landslide, a tide against the Republican Party. But he has waged one of the magnificent campaigns, and he has run 1,500,000 ahead of the ticket. 1,500,000. 1,500,000. Unprecedented, ladies and gentlemen. When this campaign started, Jack Javits said that Ken Keating can overcome 1 million votes and win. He's overcome 1.5 million, but it wasn't enough, ladies and gentlemen, to overcome the landslide. It's a tragedy for New York that Ken Keating is not going back for another 6 years.
Governor Rockefeller thus confirming for that group of Keating supporters what he's been saying all along, that a Senator Barry Goldwater candidacy could be fatal to other parts of the ticket in New York. As a matter of fact, that is just what happened here. In New York, Johnson ran up better than a 2 million vote margin. It's now 3,900,000 against Goldwater's 1,878,000 in New York, whereas Keating ran only 500,000, less than 500,000, behind Robert Kennedy. 3,066,000 for Kennedy, 2,572,000 for Keating. As Governor Rockefeller said, he overcame 1.5 million of that margin of Johnson's, but he couldn't overtake the other 500,000. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. In that close California senatorial race, a third of the vote has been counted now, and George Murphy is slowly pulling away from Senator Pierre Salinger. The vote now 1,250,000, Salinger 1,092,000. VPA says it's too close to call. In Texas, conservative Republican Congressman Bruce Alger in Dallas, seeking his 6th term, has been defeated by Dallas's former mayor Earl Cabell, who is a conservative Democrat. In Indiana, House Republican leader Charles Halleck has won re-election, which was expected. In California, that proposition to defeat, to nullify the fair housing law is apparently winning. It's got about a 2-to-1 margin already, with about 20% of the vote counted out there. In Tennessee, Democrat William Anderson has been elected to the House of Representatives from Tennessee's 6th District. He's going to succeed Democrat Ross Bass, who has been elected to the Senate. The importance of that is that William Anderson is the retired commander of the first atomic submarine, the Nautilus. And now, Eric Severide, maybe you can give us some views of what's been happening this night, this rather historic night, particularly what's been happening to extremism?
Well, you know, there was a theory, Walter, that's been articulated in great detail by at least one political scientist in this country, Dr. Lipset of California. It was maintained that the extremist groups of today are very much like those of the 20s, in fact, way back to the Native American Party, the so-called Know-Nothings of the last century. But it was also his argument that when they become extremely active, it is not because they are within sight of victory or the predominance in this country of their general point of view, but when they are in fact a declining group. Now perhaps they are. I would think that, and if we mean by extremists many of the little hate groups that have flooded the country with so-called literature, I would think one question is this. Has this defeat of the man that they have supported, whether he wanted their support or not, Mr. Goldwater, does this mean that their presence in this campaign with so much noise has immunized us against this kind of strong emotional poison, almost one could call it, and given us an idea of what our politics could be like if people like that became really powerful and numerous? Or have their activities rather desensitized us, blunted our nerve ends, and lowered our moral standards in politics so that we've come to expect this kind of thing? I must confess I don't know what the answer is. I would think that they would be rather quiet from now on. There is something else I think that one might turn to just for a moment. This Johnson sweep, of course, Walter, is going to be the big headline story all over Europe and much of the world tomorrow morning. It is now morning in Europe. Virtually all organs of public opinion in West Europe have hoped that Mr. Johnson would win. They now have their hope. It leaves the President of the United States, I would think, in a most extraordinarily powerful position in terms of our alliance, in terms of all our dealings with the friend and enemy. This is an enormous endorsement, and he comes in at a time when the government of England is in a rather shaky position in terms of its numerical majority and ability to govern, when the Russians have a new leadership, perhaps somewhat unpredictable, the Chinese are now in the atomic age, but nothing upsetting in terms of violent change has happened here. He has said he would go to Europe. He has said he would call a White House conference about peace, for whatever that might accomplish. But certainly with Mr. de Gaulle, President de Gaulle in France, now aging considerably and perhaps losing some influence, the American president really dominates the scene of this alliance. He has not turned his back in the campaign on the general theory of always trying to negotiate with the communists. And Mr. Goldwater has taken a very different line. Every opinion poll that I know about has said most people do want the attempts to negotiate to continue. Now, how he will do it, whether by attempt at a summit meeting or something of that kind, none of us yet know. His whole approach domestically on the Great Society, as he has called it since that Michigan speech, is something that will now be unveiled, I presume. He has had the task force working at it. He has been a domestic affairs man most of his political life. Foreign policy has been something rather recent for him. I would think that he will get really active in it when he thinks there's something practical and measurable that he can accomplish in that realm as well as the domestic realm, because he's a practical man who likes to run up a score.
Thank you, Eric. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News election headquarters. It's here that we have been marking this remarkable victory of Lyndon Johnson's on our scoreboard. Now 3/4 of the vote is in, a vote which it is indicated will be a record total for the United States, 71 million, and that ought to go over even the best percentage ever run up before, and that was just in the last presidential election in 1960 of some 64% of the available eligible voters. And Lyndon Johnson has 32,635,000 votes to Goldwater's 20,089,000. About an hour ago, Lyndon Johnson's percentage, which had stood at 60% most of the evening, moved up to 61 and then to 62%. And it's getting very close, remarkably close to the 64% that had been predicted by the polls as the best margin that he could expect. In the electoral vote, it was back around 9 o'clock, 4 hours ago, very early on in the evening when Lyndon Johnson moved into the lead with enough votes to be declared the presidential winner. Here's William Miller, Goldwater's running mate at Lockport, New York.
It wouldn't be, I don't think...
Congressman Miller has just come out and is speaking now.
I don't think that it would be proper for me to make any statement prior to the time that Senator Goldwater made his. I have just talked to Senator Goldwater. I just hung up the phone 2 or 3 minutes ago. He has indicated to me that he has no intention of making a statement until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That would be Arizona time, so I presume that would mean around noon here. So I indicated to him that I would come out and make this statement, which I am making. And that is that I won't make any statement until he makes his. And since he has decided not to make one until tomorrow morning, then I'm foreclosed myself from making any until that time. And as soon as he makes his statement, then I shall make mine.
Well, Congressman, did Senator Goldwater give you any reason why he is waiting?
Well, he wants to analyze, I think, in depth, not particularly the electoral vote so much as the popular vote, to find out when it's all totaled up as to exactly how much support on a people-to-people basis rather than on an electoral vote basis, the posture and position that he's taken, and let's say the so-called conservative position, how much actual popular support it's received. You can't get that from projections or from 5% of the vote or 10% of the vote or 20% of the vote. You can't really get it until it's pretty well totaled up. And this is what he wants to wait to see so that then he can make his statement in connection with the general popular support, which he believes.
Do you realistically think there's any chance of winning now, Congressman Miller?
I'm not going to make any further statement than I have already.
Congressman, did you get any impression of Senator Goldwater's mood?
It's the electoral vote that does do it.
Yes, I understand that.
Congressman, did you get any impression of Senator Goldwater's mood? Is he bitter?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, do you think
he was cheerful in this conversation?
Yes, very, very.
Something concerning the future of the party? Do you believe
No. As I say, until the vote is in, and until Senator Goldwater makes his statement, and until I confer with him in connection with his statement, I have no further statement to make.
Do you expect to send any message to Senator Humphrey?
Oh, I certainly will.
Are you going
to? Not, of course.
Not until tomorrow morning.
Oh, of course not. I won't do anything until after we make our statement.
Are you going to stay up all night?
I'm not contemplating that.
Are you going to bed now, Mr. Miller?
No.
You're not coming
No.
Well, we will not hear from you again tonight. Is that
that's right.
And
that
is
correct.
Going to bed shortly, or?
Well, I mean, why do I have to reveal these military secrets? But I am, I think, probably.
We'll play some bridge?
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you.
Not playing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're still going, we're still leaving as planned for Washington tomorrow at 2:45.
How's your family taking leave?
Oh, fine, wonderful. Well, they're great.
And how about the supporters, Congressman Miller, those with you in the Lee home?
Oh, they're fine. We take these things philosophically in Lockport.
Has it turned out the way you thought it was going to?
You mean the way I thought it was going to when?
Any time.
What do you mean?
The vote.
Well, no. I mean, as I say, I'm making no statement in connection with this. The returns at this point.
Are you surprised at the overwhelming Democratic support in New York State?
I'm making no further statement in connection with the returns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Good night to you.
So Congressman Miller discloses that his running mate, Senator Goldwater, is delaying his concession until tomorrow morning. A rather mysterious conversation. It was reported by Congressman Miller. He said the senator was not bitter. He apparently was cheerful, but is taking the highly unusual step of delaying his final comment until tomorrow morning. Now the congressman and his wife are going out to greet again the neighbors and friends from Lockport. Mrs. Miller, how are you?
Just fine.
You going to stay out much later?
Oh,
No, I don't think so. We might shake some hands, and then I think we'll turn in.
For the last time tonight.
Yes, little
Girls,
packing.
how are you taking me?
Well, I think, you know, you can't say you're not disappointed, but certainly it was a wonderful experience and a wonderful honor.
Out in Los Angeles, the Republican candidate for the Senate there, George Murphy, we understand is about to make a statement. Let's go to Los Angeles.
And I'm so pleased that the voters of the state of California, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans alike, have so far shown this confidence that we've got a lead, and I sincerely hope it keeps on this way. And a little later on, when more returns are in, we'll have a statement to make. Hi, Dodie.
What George Murphy is pleased about is that with 46% of the vote counted in California, he's pulling very slowly away from the Democratic incumbent, Senator Pierre Salinger, for that Senate seat. The figure is 1,612,000 to Salinger's 1,424,000. Our VPA says that this race, as certainly the figures would indicate, is far too close to call at this moment. Might be mentioned that Congressman Miller, who you saw a moment ago there at Lockport, Lockport, New York, his home, gave up the Republican National Committee chairmanship and a seat in Congress to make this run for the vice presidency. Although he had announced earlier he intended to resign from Congress anyway and not run, he now intends to return to his law practice in Lockport as soon as that concession does come. We did have an announcement that Goldwater's press secretary expects to make an announcement at any moment out in Phoenix, Arizona. It may simply be to confirm what Miller has already told us, that Senator Goldwater does not expect to make any statement until 10 o'clock Arizona time tomorrow morning, or later this morning, as it turns out. Now let's go to Roger Mudd at our presidential analysis desk. Roger?
Walter, Lyndon Johnson has won in Nebraska. On the basis of vote profile analysis, he is the winner there by 52%. The popular vote shows him in the lead, 144,971 to Goldwater's 122,021. But the VPA shows an ultimate victory for the president of 52%, and that would just about take care of the Middle West. An entire sweep by President Johnson of all the Midwestern states, from West Virginia all the way out to Nebraska and the Dakotas. In the state of Georgia, which is the one southern state still rocking back and forth, we finally have a decision on Georgia, and there Barry Goldwater has become the first Republican nominee, presidential nominee, to carry that state in its history. 488,873 to President Johnson's 416,796. Vote profile analysis shows that 52%, 48%. We can take a quick look at the Southern Recap Board. You will see the total vote southwide for these two candidates. President Johnson, 6,375,000. Barry Goldwater, 5,852,000. That breaks out Goldwater pulling in about 47.9% of the popular vote. This means that Senator Goldwater has carried 5 out of the 13 southern states for 47 of its 145 electoral votes. The Goldwater strategy always was to begin with a solid base of about a dozen southern states and work from there, but that base never got beyond 5 states: Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. A quick check of those 5 states this evening indicates that the difference between the election 4 years ago and the one tonight is one of shifting of voting patterns. To look at those 5 states 4 years ago, you will notice that the pockets of Republican strength centered around the cities: Birmingham, Atlanta, New Orleans, Jackson, Mississippi, Columbia, South Carolina. But tonight, the centers of Republican strength have left the cities and have moved into the rural, agricultural, deep South, formerly heavy Democratic areas. And there's no question that the reason for the senator's strength in those 5 states, those deep South states, was 1, his vote on the Civil Rights Bill; 2, his constant emphasis on law and order. He promised a return to peace and tranquility in the streets to protect the women of this nation from street demonstrations, and his constant elevation of states' rights as a general way of life if he were elected to the White House. One other thing we might mention is that in Louisiana, for instance, only one white Protestant in 4 was for Lyndon Johnson. In some places in Mississippi, the majorities against Johnson ran as high as 9-1. Around Meridian in Mississippi, Lyndon Johnson barely got 5%. In fact, Mississippi could be considered the only state in the whole country where there was a landslide against Lyndon Johnson. Harry?
Roger, there seem to be there are a couple of questions coming out of the Southern results tonight, and they both had to do with moderates. Where does this leave the Republican moderates in the Deep South? You remember Meade Alcorn, the former National Republican chairman who acted as a consultant to CBS, recalling the beginning of Operation Dixie in the Eisenhower years. And they poured a great deal of money into developing and hoping to get the benefit of the Negro vote in the South. Now that's all shot, isn't it? It's all gone.
Harry, one of the most lively, interesting Republican organizations that I ever watched was in Mecklenburg County around Charlotte, North Carolina. Mr. Alcorn knows about that organization, and back in '52, when the Republicans got a foothold here in a congressional seat there, their popularity was based not on the race issue, but on a general economic conservative philosophy. It was a reaction against big government and against what this rising young managerial class considered to be federal intervention with states' rights. Men like Robert Forsyth in Georgia. Last year, the Negroes were literally read out of the Republican Party in Georgia. This leaves these moderates in a very awkward position, and I dare say some of them probably will return to the Democratic Party.
Roger, I'm going to interrupt my own questioning of you for a moment. I've got a dispatch here somewhat wet from the Pacific Ocean. We feel that Hawaii is going to go for Lyndon Johnson. There are only 7% of the vote tabulated there, and 11,000 for President Johnson and 3,000 for Senator Goldwater. This is not, incidentally, a VPA call. This is people who we know in Hawaii, who know the place and know where these votes are from and what is happening, and they say that it's going to go for President Johnson. He's very big with the hula set, too, as well as every other set.
And the pineapple users.
Getting back to the South for 1 minute, unless we've been told to wind it up.
No, we haven't.
The Republican moderates have got a problem. What about the Democratic moderates, people like Carl Sanders in Georgia, who more or less went along with the administration, who, while they certainly didn't endorse the Civil Rights Bill, sort of went along with it, sort of said this is the coming thing. Has this hurt them badly, do you think?
Well, if you take the congressional delegation, they can see the handwriting on the wall now. That there had been some hope among Southern moderates in Washington that a moderate point of view might carry some weight in the South. But obviously, this is not the case. That where race is the big issue, you've got to be on the side of those who feel that the Negro has gone too far, that moderation on the race issue will not work, and as an ingredient of successful political life. And if you take a list of the states that Goldwater carried tonight and compare it with Nixon's list and Eisenhower's list, it's an interesting comparison. Nixon, 4 years ago, took Florida, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Virginia. Those are border and upper South states. Goldwater took Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. Dwight Eisenhower's great sweep through the South in 1956 never penetrated more deeply than Louisiana. He took Florida, Kentucky, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. So there's no question, Walter, that tonight's gains by the senator in the southern part of the state, I think we must say, were based mainly on the racial issue.
One of our southern senators, or southwestern late Ralph Yarborough in Texas, who won down there, has made one of the probably more gracious victory statements in referring to George Bush, who came from Connecticut originally and was expected to run even a closer race against Yarborough in Texas than he did. Yarborough in his victory statement said, "I think my opponent ought to pack up his baggage and go back where he came from," leaving no doubt about his feelings about his recent opponent in Texas. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election, will continue in just a moment. Back at our CBS News election headquarters, where now 77% of the popular vote has been tabulated, And Lyndon Johnson has almost a 13 million vote lead, 62% to 38%. For Lyndon Johnson and Hubert Humphrey over at Goldwater and Miller. And John Bailey, the Democratic National Committee chairman, is predicting that the Johnson margin will go to 15 million, which will certainly be a new record. The percentage already indicates that there is one. Our complete VPA model in Pennsylvania now, that's all of our vote profile analysis counties and precincts by which we make our judgments, indicates a final percentage of 50.3% for Senator Scott over Mrs. Genevieve Blatt's total there. The tabulated vote is now running at about 50.4%, with 87% of the vote tabulated. 2,024,000 votes for Senator Scott, 1,989,000 votes for Miss Genevieve Blatt. This, of course, is in the range of possible error, and we are continuing to put Pennsylvania in the too close to call category. In the same category as California, with almost a half the vote counted now, and Pierre Salinger pulling up just a little bit. The margin there is less than 200,000 votes, as you see. Salinger, 1,530,000. George Murphy, 1,705,000. That's still far too close for our VPA estimate to call. We might take a look, Bob Trout, if we may, if you don't mind, at Ohio there, too, which was another one of those very close senatorial races.
Yes, let's look at Ohio. Robert Taft, Jr., the Republican, at the last time we took a look at the numbers, was narrowly ahead of Senator Stephen Young, and he still is. Mr. Taft was expected to run even stronger, as a matter of fact, and if it hadn't been for President Johnson's great victory in Ohio, he doubtless would have come out much farther ahead than he seems to be coming out now, although the vote profile analysis still shows that it's too close to make an estimate of a final victor.
Well, I was just looking at something, too, as you were giving us those figures in New York, where Robert Kennedy has won. Senator Kenneth Keating, and some more late returns, is even closing that margin a little bit. It's now just barely 500,000 votes, and it was almost 600,000 at one time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And Henry Paolucci, you see the fellow down there at the bottom of that board, the Conservative Party candidate, said during the campaign that it would be a miracle if he got 100,000 votes in his campaign to help defeat Senator Keating. He's got considerably more than 100,000. Also, you recall Governor Rockefeller said a little while ago that Senator Keating was running 1.5 million ahead of the rest of the Republican ticket in New York State, and he said that's a record for New York. Pointed that out.
We might make a note that in the presidential race, there are only 2 states left undecided, as far as we're concerned here at CBS, and that is Alaska, which will not be heard from perhaps until much later in the morning, and Arizona, where the race is still too close to call in Senator Goldwater's home precincts. We'll return to CBS News election headquarters with further coverage of the 1964 results in just a moment. There are several things remarkable about this race tonight. The remarkable scope of President Johnson's victory, cutting across all economic, political, and racial groups, geographical groups as it has. The remarkable speed of our network election service, which has tabulated so many millions of votes faster than they've ever been tabulated before. The remarkable accuracy of the polls. Our Lewis Harris, for instance, who predicted almost on target what Lyndon Johnson's majority would be. It's now running 62%. And one of the remarkable things that just developed a little while ago, the long delay Senator Barry Goldwater has imposed in making a concession. He says it will not be until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and it might be recalled that in earlier years, of course this is his prerogative, but it is true that in earlier years when the races were far closer, and even when they were almost as wide as this one, the concessions have come far earlier. In the remarkable race in 1948, Governor Dewey in New York was arranged to concede by around 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, as I recall it. And last year, in that very close race between Vice President Nixon and then Senator Kennedy, Mr. Nixon conceded by around 9 or 10 in the morning. But it's going to be 10 o'clock before Senator Goldwater concedes, according to an announcement now from his press secretary at Phoenix, Arizona. He is at his home in Phoenix, secluded there, and does not expect to say anything until that hour. Now, Mike Wallace, perhaps you can tell us some of the details on the gubernatorial races.
There are a couple of very tight gubernatorial contests still going on. First of all, in Massachusetts, Walter, Democrat Francis Bellotti is leading 323,000 to 281,000 over former Governor John Volpe, with 33% of the popular vote tabulated. And as you can see, VPA calls that one still too close to call. The reason that Massachusetts takes such a long time to count their ballots is the fact that each Massachusetts voter has to cast a separate vote. They have what they call the Massachusetts-type ballot, which necessitates a separate vote for each candidate, and it simply takes a long time. So it's Bellotti and Volpe still too close to call, in spite of the fact that President Johnson is sweeping Massachusetts with a staggering 77% share of that vote. In the state of Wisconsin, a very tight contest also. President Johnson swept through to a tremendous victory over Barry Goldwater there, 63% to 37%. But as you can see here, Warren Knowles, the Republican, leading the incumbent Governor John Reynolds 448 to 393 with 57% of that popular vote counted, but VPA still calls it too close to call. Incidentally, in Wisconsin, the issue is, I talked to Warren Knowles just this afternoon. He said the issue there is a vote against John Reynolds. He calls him High Tax Jack. John Reynolds last time around campaigned said he was not going to have a sales tax in the state of Wisconsin. One was put up to him. He vetoed it. A selective sales tax was put up to him. And then the state was beginning to run out of money, and so he had to sign the sales tax into law, and it's hurting him out in Wisconsin tonight. Now, around the country, there are many interesting referenda today. Oregon, the state of Oregon, has become the 10th state in the union to abolish capital punishment, with half the ballots counted now. It's a conclusive 139,000 for ending the death penalty to 91,000 against. And this despite reports in today's Oregon papers of a girl raped and murdered last night near Springfield, Oregon. Very interesting referendum down in Maryland. Maryland voters have approved a state law banning discrimination in hotels and restaurants throughout the state. Now, that old law there did not cover Maryland's Eastern Shore, where lies the racially torn town of Cambridge, Maryland. This referendum was the country's first large public vote on civil rights, and in a state with one foot in the South, the vote is about 303,000 in favor of a public accommodations law to 275,000 against, and 99% of the votes are counted. Just one last quick one, Walter. Out in California, they are voting to block pay TV or not. Well, 164,000 Californians want to block pay television. 73,000 want to permit pay television. 3% of the vote is counted.
I've always thought we were pretty good. Don't see any objection to us at all. Campaign 64, CBS News coverage of the presidential election will continue in just a moment. With 78% of the vote counted now, 54 million votes have been counted, 33,500,000 of them for Lyndon Johnson and 20,800,000 for Senator Goldwater. Robert Kennedy, the former Attorney General, who has won a race for the Senate in New York against the incumbent Republican Senator Kenneth Keating, is coming into his headquarters at the Statler Hilton Hotel in New York. You see him there, a smiling candidate who will now go to the New York Senate, or to the United States Senate from New York, to join his brother, Edward Kennedy, Teddy Kennedy, senator from Massachusetts, who also won his race in Massachusetts tonight. The first time in our history, two brothers serving in the United States Senate at the same time. A family that has given 3 senators to the nation. One, of course, the late President John Kennedy. Robert Kennedy overcame charges of carpetbagging coming into New York State since his recent residents have not been here. Chuck Von Fremd is down there at the Kennedy headquarters. Chuck, come in.
Yes, sir, and the new junior senator or senator-elect. Hello, Ethel, how are you? Bob, good to see you. The new senator-elect from New York State is just making his appearance here at the Statler Hilton, which is the headquarters for the Democratic State National Committee. It's been a long evening, but these 2,000 very enthusiastic supporters have been standing here shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow for the last 4 or 5 hours, and now they finally have their moment. They've got the man they were rooting for, the new senator from New York City. Standing off to Mr. Kennedy's right, to your left, is former Governor Averell Harriman of New York, another leading Democrat who has campaigned very strongly for the senator-elect, Senator Kennedy. Mrs. Kennedy, Ethel Kennedy, the mother of 8 children, who is expecting their 9th, is also looking very happy. And here is Mayor Bob Wagner.
Our next United States Senator, and going to be a great and wonderful fighting Senator, Bob Kennedy.
Thank you. Mayor Wagner, Governor Harriman, I've sent the following telegram to Senator Kenneth Keating. My appreciation for your telegram of good wishes and your gracious and generous offer of assistance. As we both know, there is unfinished business in this state and in our country. And the utilization of your talents will be essential to achieve the goals of all of us. Signed, Robert F. Kennedy. I want to take this opportunity to express my deep appreciation to all those throughout the state of New York who supported my candidacy. I want to express my appreciation and gratitude of my wife and my family for the many kindnesses that were shown to us during the period of the last 8 weeks of this campaign. These are days that we will never forget, and we're most appreciative. I also want to take this opportunity to express my particular appreciation to a number of individuals out of a large group who were particularly helpful. First, to Governor Harriman, who was I owe a great debt of gratitude to Governor Harriman and to Mrs. Harriman. But I think that really this is a debt that is owed by all of us as American citizens, because I don't think that anybody has made a greater contribution to public life over the period of the last 3 decades than Governor Averell Harriman. Without any question, if it hadn't been for his determination and his courage and his judgment, we would never have had a test ban treaty. So we all owe a debt of gratitude to him for that. And I also want to express my appreciation to Mayor Wagner, who who during the course of this campaign, from the very beginning, has been an advisor and a counselor to me, and during the course of the campaign, in the most difficult moments, stood by my side and was a real friend. And I want to express my appreciation to him for all that he's done for me and the very important role that he played in the election result tonight. I also want to thank Billy McCune, and the state chairman, and all of the effort that he made, the organizational effort that he put into this campaign, and express my appreciation to him. And also to Mayor John Burns of Binghamton, New York, who was a co-chairman of our campaign and really made such a major difference for all of us. And once again stood by and was a real friend. And I want to also thank Peter Strauss, who I hope is here. Who organized all of our campaigns. And thank his wife, Ellen, for all that she did. And I also, if you'll bear with me one more moment, I'd like to thank a relative.